The question is, what happens next? Will there actually be regime change in Iran? There's a lot of hope. There's a lot of fear. I want to pose this question to all of you. Do you believe that regime change is possible in Iran? I think a lot of Iranians remain skeptical that external conflict can actually translate into internal political change. But is this possible, and how would it have to be done?
I'm happy to jump in on this because I wrote about this topic for America First Policy Institute. And this was before the 2024 election. And what I shared there was we may not see regime change, but I think there is a very strong likelihood, and I wrote this again before the 2024 election, before this war, for regime collapse. And certainly in the wake of the 12-day war, I think that the possibility for regime collapse is just ever more present. And there's so many factors we can point to: the value of the currency, inflation, the rolling blackouts, the droughts, the mismanagement of resources, the oppression of the people, 20,000 taken political prisoners, and so on and so forth. All of these factors together, I think it certainly behooves policymakers in the West to think very hard about the possibility of regime collapse and how do we get ahead of that. Who are our partners who could work with the West in keeping that a contained situation, and what would the future look like for Iran in such a scenario? But we really must prepare for such a scenario.
Nathan?
I'm afraid it's a really good question, and I'm afraid I don't have a good answer to it. Ultimately, regime change, the Iranian people are going to have to decide that themselves. And the U.S. and the West can be supportive, but we're bystanders and helpers rather than primary agents in bringing that about. One observation I will share on this question: dictatorships are brittle, and they appear to be permanent and durable right up until the moment when they're not. In the 1980s, the United States intelligence community and policymakers and think tank members, everybody was convinced that the Soviet Union was going to be around forever, and we had to accommodate we had to adjust and accommodate the permanent existence of the Soviet bloc and the Soviet Union, and then the wall came down. Now, analogies are not arguments. Analogies are not predictions, I should say. So just because the Soviet Empire collapsed doesn't mean that the theocracy in Iran is going to collapse under its own contradictions, under the weight of its own brutality. But there is precedent for it, and I can't wait to have this conversation in Tehran one day under a free government.
Khosrow, 30 seconds.
I'm going to go a bit personal on this one. I come from a background, both my parents were activists. My dad was a political prisoner in Iran for 4 years. He just survived mass executions by luck. And the first rally I attended, I was 8 years old. And I have been going at it. My family has been going at it. The whole nation has been at this fight. The first major rally in Iran after the rise of the Khomeini's regime, this Islamist oppressive regime, happened in March 1979. Women took to the streets of Tehran and many other cities in droves, saying that we are not going to abide by these rules. They were pushed back. Again and again, people have taken to the streets in Iran over the years. They have sacrificed his life, limb, and liberty. People are in jail for decades in Iran, and they are not going back. This nation has deep roots. Its history, its culture has deep roots. It always has celebrated life, and it's being ruled by a death cult. This death cult has taken this nation hostage, and this nation is going to liberate itself. The world can stand by Iranians. The world can help them. If they don't, no matter what, we are going to take back our country.
Today's discussion really underscores that the 12-day war was more than just a military confrontation. The big point right now is that we are seeing the vulnerabilities of the Islamic regime exposed. Where we go from here is the big question. Are we at a turning point? Can we actually return to an Iran that is free? I am praying on it. Thank you for my panel today. We hope you enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you, Ali, Khosrow, Nathan, and Shirin. Our next discussion will be a recorded fireside chat with one of the world's foremost dissidents and freedom fighters, Nathan Sharansky. He is a chess champion, a former minister, and a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, whose bravery in the fight against the Soviet Union made him a household name. This conversation was pre-recorded with Len Khodorkovsky, Senior Advisor at the Kratch Institute for Tech Diplomacy. Before we hear this pre-recording, please welcome Len Khodorkovsky to the stage.
Hello, everybody. Great to be with this. I hope you're still awake. It was a great discussion. I had a chance, as some of you know, I was born in the Soviet Union. And Natan Sharansky was a one man against the big superpower, big machine of the Soviet Union in the 80s that decided to stand up and speak truth to power and inspire a lot of the average people who hated the regime. But as you know, it's very hard to stand up against the machine. And people like Natan Sharansky gave people the strength to speak out and turn the tide of history. As Ambassador Sales said, one day the experts were predicting that Soviet Union will last forever, and the next day was gone. And I think there are some parallels that apply to the situation in Iran, which we discussed, that I had the honor to discuss with Natan Sharansky in recent days. And I hope you enjoy the conversation. I think a lot of it is very insightful, and there are a lot of lessons to be drawn, not just for us sitting here in the room and people outside of Iran, but inside of Iran as well. I think there are a lot of parallels that are powerful and will help all of us believe even stronger that the inevitable collapse of the regime and a free democratic Iran is near and is possible, because people like Sharansky and those who are struggling against the regime in the country have a unique view of the regime that we don't see. And I think you'll see that in the way that he recounts his own struggle, that I think parallels the struggle of Iranian dissidents. So please enjoy. Natan Sharansky, welcome to the Iran conference. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a real honor to be able to speak with you today.
Thank you.
Thank you. I first heard your name when I was growing up in the Soviet Union. Your journey as a Jewish dissident made a deep impression on me as a Jewish kid. I've heard your name spoken by my parents when it was hard to speak about anti-Soviet ideas in the Soviet Union. And, you made a decision at a certain point to speak out against the regime and risk being arrested or worse. No one was predicting the Soviet Union's fall in those days. So, it must have been difficult to make a decision to risk your safety. So, did you think you'd succeed in challenging this big superpower at the time, or was it, was it a simpler decision? How did you make that decision?
Well, it's true. In all the struggle, whether as an activist, whether as a prisoner who could be sentenced to death, whether serving my 9 years in Gulag, in the prison, the most difficult decision was the first one to start this process. First of all, declaring that you don't want to live in the Soviet Union, you want to leave the Soviet Union, and second, to become dissident who's fighting for human rights, because this very first step meant that at the end of your career, that all the world which you have built in for yourself is destroyed in one moment, that you will be, for sure, you will be searched, you will be interrogated, many of your friends will stop their connection to you, it will be a different world. But the moment you started, you joined it, you became a free person. For the first time in your life, you're not afraid to say things which you really think and believe in, to do only what you think is right. And that was quite relief. It was real liberation. So the first you got your freedom inside yourself. And the moment you started enjoying this life, after being like Soviet slave for so many years, it's such a change that you don't want to go back. So first, it's inner freedom which you're getting for free the moment you decide to be dissident. And second, yes, we knew that it is huge and very strong empire. But we believe that though it looks such a invincible, it's the biggest power in the world, but you could see how it is rotten from inside, how weak it is from inside, how very few people really believe in this ideology. So you hope that in the end, thanks to your struggle, thanks to position of millions of other people, and hopefully thanks to the support of free world, which you never knew whether it will come or not come, that all these factors together will help you to win. So you hope. You know for sure that your life will be changed. You know for sure that you now become a free person. Whether you will win physically, that was the question.
So did you go beyond hope? Did you, at a certain point, start believing that you'll be free?
Yeah, well, the more I was involved in the dissident life, the life of Jews who wanted to get freedom as Jews, and the struggle for human rights in general, becoming one of the founding members of Helsinki Group, which really united different causes of different religious and national dissidents. The more you live inside it, the more optimistic you are, because you see again and again how more and more people don't really believe in this ideology. They are what I call double thinkers. They are afraid to speak out as dissidents, but they don't believe in this regime. And so regime has to spend more and more energy to keep these millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people under control. And so you see physical almost, you feel how the regime becomes weaker and weaker, and how people are more and more close to this moment when they'll cross this line between doublethink and dissent. And so with the time, the threat that you will go to prison is bigger, but also the hope that in the end our struggle will be victorious is also bigger.
So, like you, many Iranians put their lives on the line to challenge the regime for the last 46 years. And similarly, many so-called experts are skeptical about the possibility of the regime's collapse. And what can you tell those skeptics?
Yeah, first of all, you're right that it's simply difficult to imagine how big is the difference between the world which is in the heads of dissidents or us and the world of so-called Sovietologists, or today probably Iranian, the specialists in Iran. Because the people from outside, so-called Sovietologists, they look from outside at this power, they see how strong is their army. So they see these military parades, but they're demonstrating the most powerful weapons in the world. And then they look at this small group of dissidents, and they say, well, how many soldiers these dissidents have? So, look, we can have a lot of sympathy to these people who want to be free. But in real politics, we have to deal with the powers. And here is the power in front of us. And as a result, it's interesting, we, the dissidents, even in prison, we were seeing how weak from inside the system is. And we were predicting its failure. And even some weeks before Soviet Union fell, the specialists in America, in universities, we are predicting that Soviet Union, with all this communist ideology, is forever. And in the end, this falling of the regime is happening very quickly, because the number of dissidents, the number of double thinkers, of those who are afraid to speak but don't trust the regime, is growing all the time. And at some moment, when some people stop being afraid and they cross this line, millions others join them, and that is the moment of revolution. And it happens suddenly for people outside who don't understand this process. It comes from nowhere, suddenly. For dissidents, for people who are fighting from inside, who understand the weakness of the regime, it's a logical result. So to all these specialists who predict that this Iranian regime is forever, you will be surprised. But it depends also on you how quickly you'll be surprised.
So on that note, you've always championed the Iranian people's struggle for freedom. You've said the West should stand with the Iranian democratic opposition. You said the Iranian people are the real allies of the free world. How do you think the Iranian dissidents and the opposition can win the support in the West?
Well, Iranian dissidents, first of all, have to remind to the West that as long as this regime, this totalitarian regime, this fanatical regime, which religiously believes in fighting the free world, as long as it exists, it's a danger. It's danger for your security, and it's not accidental that you're so concerned about non-conventional weapons of that regime. And you're right to be concerned. But you also should be concerned about non-conventional nature of this regime, which really believes in happy life in the next world if they're killing enough people in this world. And that's why it must be interest of your security, of defending your world, that the dissidents will prevail, that democratic Iran will emerge. And now look at this dissidents. How you can know what is really happening in that regime? Only thanks to dissidents. How can you know that Iranian people really want to live in freedom? Only through those demonstrations of these brave women and students and dissident activity. So you have to understand, if you have allies on that side of the Iron Curtain, inside this very dangerous regime, these are Iranian dissidents, whether they are inside Iran or whether they are abroad, but they are your allies because their interest, in fact, is interest of your security too.
Israel was just involved in a 12-day war with the regime itself. It certainly weakened it, and it eliminated the regime's air defenses, took out a lot of its military leadership, its nuclear scientists, its proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah. So the regime is at the weakest point it's been since 1979 by all credible measures. Do you think the end is near, or is the regime change on the horizon? How do you think the regime will finally crumble?
Well, first of all, I would say you have to understand that our country lives all those 35 years that I'm in the country, since I was released from Soviet prison, and in those years that I was in the government, the threat of Iranian nuclear bomb was the threat number one for our state. We heard the statements of Iranian leaders that Israel is the country of one bomb, that they were speaking about world without Zionism, means the world where Israel is annihilated. And we knew that that is our biggest threat to our survival, that's Iranian bomb. And though we were preparing ourselves for this and developed many systems, so nobody knew how it will finish. So it was very risky step to take, and no doubt that the fact that Hamas did what they did with this awful terrorist pogrom on Israel made us determined to do steps which we were not ready to do before. And many things that we prepared technologically and military were used. And so, from the point of view of Israel, it was a very successful operation. And for the first time in years that I live in Israel, we don't feel this threat, immediate threat of our destruction. Second, I have to say that this fear and hatred towards the regime was never translated into the attitude towards the Iranian people. In fact, I would say that even Jews who came from Iran have a lot of love and respect to their own civilizations that they feel themselves part of. And these also feel that we are representatives of ancient civilization, Iranians. It's natural for us to be together. Now, we did want, and I have to say, I as a dissident did hope that that will be the moment of Iranian revolution. In fact, in 2007, we had a meeting of Václav Havel and Maria Aznar. We organized a meeting of dissidents from all over the world, and mainly from Middle East, in Prague, discussing the future of these dictatorships. And I think everybody agreed that the first candidate is Iran. Why? Because that is the place where you have the most developed civil society, which is necessary condition for democracy to survive, where you have women's organizations, students' organizations, trade unions, and I'm speaking about something that was 15 years ago, who are ready for the change. So it was our hope in 2009. We were all very disappointed with President of the United States, then President Obama, who in fact at the moment of revolution, or the moment of high hope, and people were on their way to barricades, in fact said something like that the engagement with the regime is more important than changing of the regime. And we do believe in changing of the regime, not from outside, from inside. Iran, it seems at least, that underground, there are civil institutions, there is belief in freedom and democracy, there is the whole world of art, which is already developing behind the scene of free thought. So I do hope, I heard from some people, if only the war would continue for another week, then there could be revolution. I don't know whether it is right or not, but yes, we want it. Nobody can make it for Iranian people. It is Iranian people who in the end have to bring this change.
So I want to take us back to your personal struggle in the Soviet Union. You were in prison for 9 years, I believe. When President Reagan at the time called the Soviet Union the evil empire, and people in the West were demonstrating, protesting on behalf of Soviet Jews like you. You said you felt stronger than your jailers and that your struggle was not in vain. The people in Iran are imprisoned by their regime today. If they
difficult path that you have to go of Iran, I would say, you're free people. You're keeping the spark of freedom. I want you to know that the free people, they all believe in you and are with you. And whatever will be the difficult path that you have to go through, remember that the free world is with you. Be blessed in your struggle.
And finally, last question. Clearly, President Reagan's words and how the free world stood with the Soviet dissidents at the time made a big difference. What does American support for dissident movements, both in the Soviet Union and in Iran and other places, how does that serve the interests of the American people?
It is very difficult to divide freedom between different countries. If totalitarian regime is in one country, it will by its own nature, it will do everything that the people of his country will be the enemies of the neighbors. Because dictatorships needs enemies. In order to control its own people, it needs enemies. And it needs internal enemies, dissidents are internal enemies, and external enemies, free will. So dictatorship is always a threat to its neighbors. Powerful dictatorship is always a threat to all the world. And as long as such powerful dictatorships as the Iranian dictatorship exist, or in the past Soviet Union, and China is another candidate for dangerous dictatorship. As long as they exist as dictatorships, America, the leader of the free world, is in danger. So if you want to live in peace, in security, not to spend too much energy for arms race and to build different layers of defense against these totalitarian regimes, you should be dreaming about change of that regime. You should do everything to help to those dissidents in these countries who want to change this regime, to help them, to give them feeling that you are together with them. It is in the interest of your own freedom and security.
Well, on that note, Natan Sharansky, thank you so much for joining us today. We enjoyed speaking about the struggle, your struggle, and the struggle of the Iranian people, and we hope that better days are ahead for all free people around the world. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Natan and Len. Please join us in welcoming Pastor Steve Berger, an American faith leader and head of Ambassador Services International, to discuss the persecution of Christians in Iran and the role the global church can play in supporting their fight.
Well, good morning, distinguished guests and dear friends. It is a profound privilege to stand before you all today, and I extend my heartfelt thanks to His Royal Highness the Crown Prince for his gracious invitation to let me speak. The title of my brief message today is Moving Forward by Looking Back. Moving Forward by Looking Back. In the next few minutes, I want to take you on a journey across 3 eras, 3 cultures, and 3 great legacies. First, I want to talk to you about the enlightened, and I mean that with the bottom of my heart, the enlightened leadership of Cyrus the Great, King of Persia. Secondly, the early connection, and this might be surprising to some of you in the room, the early connection between Christians and Persians. And finally, the principled vision of the American founding fathers. Now, I admit at first glance, these 3 worlds may seem very far apart, and yet they are bound together by 3 golden threads. Those threads are religious freedom, human dignity, and respect for human rights. All those values, ancient yet ageless, are as urgent today as they have ever been. Let's start with Cyrus, king of Persia from 550 to 530 BC. Built an empire stretching from the Mediterranean to Central Asia, vast in size and unmatched in influence. Had he not died at a young age due to a war wound that he received, there is no telling what all Cyrus the Great might have accomplished. Here's something that distinguishes Cyrus, though, from all other world leaders. Many rulers conquer lands, few win hearts, but Cyrus did both. Cyrus fulfilled the work that God called him to do. 200 years before Cyrus was even born, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob named Cyrus by name. And in the book of Isaiah, chapter 45, he laid out Cyrus's life calling. It is no wonder then that God called Cyrus his anointed one. The Cyrus Cylinder, called by many the first charter of human rights. It was unearthed in Babylon in 1879, and it records Cyrus's policies. Number 1, to honor the gods of every people. No world leader says that. Cyrus the Great did. Secondly, to restore the displaced to their homes. And third, to grant freedom of worship to all. One shining example of his philosophies was his decree allowing the Jewish exiles to return from Babylon to rebuild their temple, restoring not only their place of worship, but their very identity. Cyrus understood what despots and dictators never seem to grasp, and that's that you cannot force unity. You can only foster it. And Cyrus did a magnificent job of that. Founding father here in the United States of America, James Madison, echoed, I believe, the heart and the spirit of Cyrus's truth centuries after Cyrus. James Madison said, "The religion then of every man must be left to the conviction and conscience of every man." Additional founding fathers studied Cyrus's philosophies. Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and John Quincy Adams, among others, all studied the historian Xenophon's Cyropedia, a portrait of Cyrus as a ruler whose strength was tempered by mercy. Those very lessons found their way into the DNA of America's own founding principles. Cyrus the Great, the first world leader to use the words "the Great," and he was Persian, and you are to be celebrated for your contribution to world history. Next, let me talk to you about ancient Christianity and its connection with Persia. I want to leap forward several centuries. Christianity, beloved, did not stop at the borders of the Roman Empire. It traveled east. In fact, you'll find in the New Testament, our Christian Bible, in the book of Acts chapter 2, it records something very detailed and yet very insightful. The first peoples mentioned who were there on the day of Pentecost in Jerusalem, who responded to the message of Jesus, were indeed people who lived in Persian lands. The Parthians, the Medes, and the Elamites, all from Persian lands, there on the day of Pentecost. They heard the gospel, they believed, and then they returned to their homes with the flame of Christian faith alive in their hearts. People from Persian lands, listen to this, were present and participated in the very day the church was born. Tradition tells us the apostles Thomas, Thaddeus, and Bartholomew journeyed east, strengthening the church in Persia. By the time of the Sasanian Empire in the 3rd century, Christian communities were firmly established in Persian lands. They weren't hidden in corners, and they weren't underground, but they participated in and benefited and were active in Persian public life. The Academy of Nisibis became their intellectual heart, training clergy, translating Greek works into Syriac, preserving philosophy, medicine, and science. Those translations later helped fuel the Islamic Golden Age, influencing scholars from Baghdad to Cordoba. These Christians built churches, blending and therefore honoring Persian artistry with Christian symbols. Christian poets and thinkers engaged with the great questions of the day. The Christian presence in Persia proved a profound truth. Faith can flourish in diversity, and diversity can flourish in freedom. Let's talk about our shared legacy now. If you look closely, you're going to see the same current flowing through all three legacies that I mentioned. Cyrus's imperial tolerance, Christianity's connection to Persia, and America's constitutional liberty. All three proclaim the same message, that a society is strongest when it guards the rights of conscience, honors human dignity, and protects the freedom of belief. Cyrus laid the foundation, Persian Christians helped build on it, and the American founders established the legal house to shelter it. So what's our call today? This has to mean something to us now. What does it inspire in us? What do we do with this great inheritance? We've got to remember, number one, that freedom, justice, and equality, they are not luxuries, they are necessities. We recognize that bridges are stronger than walls, and dialogue is more fruitful than division. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel once said, "Evangelical Christians are Israel's best friends. We have no better friends in the world." The kind of friendship, this kind of friendship, could one day blossom between evangelical Christians in the West, even around the world, and the people and leadership of Iran. Only if they are rooted in these shared values, if they are secured by just governance and advanced by leaders who choose peace over conflict. In fact, I would like to honor His Royal Highness the Crown Prince for being the highest ranking Persian leader to ever visit Jerusalem. Hallelujah. While there, His Majesty prayed for peace, prosperity, and friendship. This is the very mentality of Cyrus. Dare I say, the spirit of Cyrus. If Cyrus could hold together a vast, diverse empire through personal liberty and mutual respect, surely we must aim to do the same today. Because freedom and human dignity are not relics for museums. They are the blueprint for a better future. And so, my friends, let's move forward by looking back. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, Pastor Berger. Our next message comes from MP Luke Ackhurst, a member of Parliament in the United Kingdom.
Hello, my name is Luke Ackhurst and I'm a member of Parliament in Britain. I'm sending greetings from the home of democracy, the British House of Commons. As a member of Parliament, I know how important your struggle for freedom and democracy is. The people of Iran have shown extraordinary courage in their struggle for freedom, human rights and a democratic future. In their struggle, they are fighting not just to free themselves, but the entire world from the scourge of this evil dictatorship. I and many parliamentarians around the world stand with you. I am committed to increasing pressure on the Iranian regime, cutting off its ability to fund terror, and providing maximum support to those fighting for a free and democratic Iran. The Iranian people, not the regime, represents the future of your country, and we will continue to support your right to decide that future.
Please join us in welcoming Canadian Member of Parliament, Shuvaloy Manjumbar, in conversation with Len Khodorkovsky to discuss how Western democracies can stand up to Tehran.
We're back. We are honored to have Canadian Member of Parliament, Shuvaloy Manjumdar, with us. And I think there are a lot of Canadian Iranians, and I think it would be interesting for this audience and the audience watching us to get a perspective from Canada as to the relations between Canada and the regime and how where things are and where things are going. So first of all, thank you for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me, and that's a big question to open with. I'm a rookie member of Parliament, elected twice in 2 years, but I have a history working on this file of Iranian freedom for about 19 years now, from the field and now in Parliament. About a decade ago, I was an advisor in the government for Stephen Harper, where we closed the embassy because it was a front for terrorism. We rejected the Iranian diplomats inside Canada, and we embarked upon a massive series of programs in Iran and in support of transparency around nuclear inspections. Many events happened after 2015 when Justin Trudeau took over as Prime Minister in Canada, looking for rapprochement in Tehran rather than maximum pressure. It turned out that was not the will of the Iranian people or the source or the course of destiny. And ultimately, the Liberal government had to reconnect with the original ideas we had been pursuing 10 years prior. Today, Canada is now in an aftermath of an election and looking to chart its course for what that relationship with Iran would look like. Obviously, the region is massively disrupted. We know that we cannot trust the regime for its propaganda, for its promotion of terrorism, for its nuclear ambitions. And there's a lot of moving dynamics that I'm happy to get into. But the perspective from Canada generally at large is you have had historically a government that more recently has been looking to try and formalize relations with Tehran, and an opposition in the Conservatives who have been very suspicious of the regime from the very beginning.
I think I'd like to parse to what the government is doing and how the government views the regime versus how the people view the regime. It's always a theme that we have to remind ourselves that the Iranian government is not the Iranian people. Well, the same thing is true in every country. You know, there's how politicians view things, and then there's how average citizens view things. Iran has nearly 300,000 Canadian Iranians. Sorry, Canada has nearly 300,000 Canadian Iranians. And I'd be curious as to, let's put government aside, and left or right. How does an average Canadian, Iranian Canadian or otherwise, view Canada's relationship with the regime?
Look, that's a complicated question, but let me be very clear. There was unanimous support in Parliament to list the IRGC as a terror organization. That meant all of Canada's political parties had a consensus that the IRGC is a terror front. Now, in Canada, we've had millions of dollars being snow-washed through our capital markets, our real estate markets, IRGC officials finding safe cover in places like Toronto. The regime's agents have been harassing not just members of the Iranian Canadian community, but have put at risk Canadian politicians and political leaders of different stripes. Legendary Liberal Justice Minister Irwin Cotler continues to live on.
هلند دوستان ببخشید یه لحظه بابا نمیکنه نمیدونم چرا لینکش کار نمیکنه interesting یه لحظه دوستان من میگم اگه میخواین سوال بپرسین برین توی چت بپرسین میدونین برای اینکه اینجا این QR کد که اینا دارن میگن کار نمیکنه okay yeah that's why that's just so stupid right یه واسه من ویدیو okay کار کرد
under house protection and close protection in Montreal. My conservative deputy leader, Melissa Lanceman, had to maintain close protection for the balance of a better part of a year. I think when Canadians generally look at this, whether they are of Iranian descent or not, they find a lot of this foreign adventurism inside our country very troubling. There is a multi-partisan demand to confront and stop it. But a reluctance of actual government decisions to rout out IRGC operatives, to end snow-washing money, to end the terrorism that is not just happening inside Canada, the intimidation of our own people, but also the economy of carjackings that are financing Hezbollah and a variety of Iranian fronts. So in Canada, we have some serious problems when it comes to the regime's activities. My hope is as we go back to Parliament next week, we can bring a lot of focus on not just fixing our country, but also supporting the freedom-loving people of Iran as well.
Let me pick up on that, on the Hezbollah point. Has the 12-day war and the decimation of Hezbollah by Israel, has that affected the kinds of activities the group has done on Canadian soil? Have you seen any of that, or is that still to be seen?
Nothing substantial as of yet. You know, we are watching events transform so radically across the Middle East since October 7th. In less than 2 years, the dynamic of the region has been completely upended. All of the assumptions that we have held about who holds power and how freedom is ordered in the region is now upside down. In so many ways, that is to the great thanks to the State of Israel for taking fearless decisions in defanging terrorism in their region, as recently as this morning, and in demonstrating to the world the toothlessness of the Iranian regime in being able to protect itself. Now, what I think is sometimes lost in the plot, if I might, Len, is that Iran and Israel and the wider issue of IRGC and Iran's terrorism around the world is sometimes lost in the bigger story here. In so many ways, in the last decade, we've watched the People's Republic of China and Beijing underwrite and support Iran's and its regime's capacities, not just its nuclear capacities, its missile and drone capacities, its promotion of terrorism. And in this wider competition, even after the 12-day war, the greatest risk inside Iran is whether or not the Iranians are going to get support from Beijing in rebuilding their efforts in nuclear arsenal, but also their ballistic missiles and their drone capacities. My hope is that in Ottawa, that we realize that this world is getting incredibly competitive. And when it comes to our alignments in the democratic world, whether partnering with Europe, that sometimes has a pretty soft position towards Iran, or Washington, which today is pursuing maximum pressure yet once again, that Ottawa gets that formulation right.
I think this idea of there are things that Iranian people can do to help themselves, and then there's what all of us on the outside can do. We heard E3 announce their intention to snap back sanctions on Iran recently. Hopefully they'll follow through on those things. What can Canada do to increase pressure on the regime to hold it accountable for not just nuclear advancement, but terrorism, hostage taking, building missiles, and the whole, and certainly threatening Iranians or Canadians on Canadian soil? How can Canada increase the pressure on Iran?
Domestically, we can chase down IRGC officers, put them in prison, or deport them. We can shut down our borders to the snowwashing of capital that Iranian regime officials use to protect the riches they've stolen from the people. Internationally, Canada historically had supported to the tune of millions of dollars the inspections regime of IAEA inspectors to ensure that the Iranian compliance eventually could be witnessed. Now, we were always skeptical of the regime's intentions. We were supportive of the negotiations, but we wanted the negotiations to be meaningful by supporting the inspections regime and pursuing transparency. Canada also launched a global dialogue for the future of Iran, creating space online for people of Iranian diaspora descent, but also inside Iran, to the tune of 4 million people, to dialogue with each other about what the future of the country could look like. It used circumvention software that was developed in Canada and was an alternative to an embassy, and how we maintained a dialogue with an incredible, historic, and wonderful people. I also think that when we think about how Iran is now looking at reestablishing itself after the 12-day war, whether it's through the ballistic program or others, Canada should be working with other partners to see how secondary sanctions can be imposed on entities that are actually supporting the reconstruction of the regime's terrorism. So there are many tools available. Finally, I mean, the United Nations is something that I have increasing skepticism of every single day, despite the aspiration of what is exhibited at the UN through the Cyrus cylinder and its highest hopes. Pastor, I really appreciate what you said earlier about that. There is accountability every year on the Iranian regime that Canada used to lead, and it would be holistic effort around the world to talk about the regime and its predatory nature, to win support, to hold the regime accountable, and give voice to the people that have been suffering so badly underneath it. So many tools and ways in which Canada can modestly contribute to the cause of the Iranian people.
Well, one of the ways in which Canada has been at the forefront is designating IRGC as a terrorist organization. It seems obvious now, but it wasn't so obvious just a few years ago. And still, not enough Western and countries or countries in a free world have done so. Why do you think they haven't? What is preventing the free world from calling a spade a spade?
Len, that's a huge question. I mean, there seems to be a complete inversion of moral values. Here we have a regime hell-bent on extremist rule, promoting it through unparalleled terrorism around the world, suppressing the rights of their own people, and looking to nuclearize themselves to commit a genocide in another part of the Middle East on the state of Israel. Meanwhile, just across the Gulf, you have another nation that has been pursuing massive internal reform, massive opportunities of education for its women, commercialization of its industries in Saudi Arabia. But if you go to the elites in the media, in the bureaucracy, the international bureaucracy, the academy, what you get is, well, Iran is a country that needs to be protected for its terrorism. But Gulf countries looking to normalize relations with Israel and provide stability should be punished because they're somehow fundamentalist. So to your question is my answer. Too often we start the story from the middle, not from the beginning. And in today's world where we have this inversion of an understanding of the realities of the region, it's time for the world to get a grip. It's time for the world to ally with the forces that are moving toward modernity over our medieval rivals, and that includes standing with the Iranian people for their freedom.
I'd like to take us back to 2020 when the regime shot down a Ukrainian Airlines flight with 55 Canadians on board and 30, I believe it was 30 permanent residents. So Canada felt the terrorism of the regime directly. But ironically, the regime has felt emboldened to try and intimidate the families of the victims, to try and disincentivize the world to holding them accountable, to inventing ways in which this was somebody else's fault. Is Canada doing enough to support the families of the victims? Where do things stand? 5 years since that happened. Is the regime any closer to being held accountable?
It's not. And in Montreal, we have the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, where you can litigate the protections around commercial airlines and commercial flights. And PS 752 families have been petitioning Ottawa and their government to hold the regime accountable by taking the regime to court for how it used this flight as a civilian shield for protecting their terror apparatus. Sadly, we've not seen the kind of support that these families deserve. They are not being supported in resisting the regime's intimidation inside the country. And too often they are a footnote and a photo op rather than central to advocacy. I'm proud to come from a part of the country that actually has a very different attitude about them, whereas there can be no meaningful dialogue with Iran or the regime in Iran without actual accountability for the Canadians they murdered.
And finally, the free world seems to have tried a lot of ways to deter the regime. We've tried JCPOA, we've tried UN sanctions, we've put maximum pressure on the regime. And as the previous panel discussed, terrorism is in its DNA. It's not changing. It's not being deterred. Question is, we should give President Trump credit for putting the words regime change on the table. I think the United States government under the Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0 has probably gone farther than any other Western government to act on its words, first by eliminating Soleimani in 2020, then by U.S. striking the Iranian nuclear facilities. And then President Trump actually said, maybe there should be regime change in Iran. Should that be a legitimate option for Western governments, government in Canada? Is it past time for us to be able to, among other options, put regime change on the table?
Well, listen, at some point, Len, I'll have to tell you the story about how I met Qasem Soleimani in the Al Rashid Hotel in Baghdad in 2006. I had been working with an American organization, the International Republican Institute, trying to help people who believe in democracy win the tools to succeed in their country, not just in Iraq, but around the region, including in Iran. And that was, you'll remember, around the same time as a Green Revolution attempt. Listen, I have long held the view that international expectations of democratic reform in another country is not the same as democratic reformers realizing their own sovereignty, their own country. I think that the 12-day war was successful at degrading much of IRGC's capacity to control Iranian society. Much of the Basiji have been left to continue to thrive, and I understand exactly why Iranians of so many different ethnic faiths and perspectives are careful about how they want to remove their regime. I come from a party and a perspective that supports a change of regime in Iran. I come from the perspective that the regime has long outlasted its value and is not interested in long-term peace or stability, and is in fact the greatest threat to international peace and stability. I come from the perspective that the Iranian people deserve much better than what they have been afforded, and providing them tools and opportunities to organize and succeed needs to be a long-term approach for the Iranian people. But no foreign government can give to the Iranian people what they must wrest for themselves. And so when I think about the lion and the sun, it is time now for the lion to rise. It is time now for the sun to rise. And it is time for the IRGC to understand that they are the prey, not the predator.
I can't imagine a better way to finish our conversation. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you for your time.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you all for being here as well. Thank you.
Thank you both for a great discussion. Our next presentation, What Comes Next? Iran's Political Transition Plan, will feature a presentation of the Iran Prosperity Project's blueprint for Iran's post-Islamic Republic transition to security and stability. Please join the Iran Prosperity Project architect, Nufti advisor, and senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, Saeed Qasemnejad.
Thank you for having me here. I have to say I have asked our Nufti friend not to call me IPP architect. It reminds me of George Costanza. So now that I aired it publicly, I hope they change that title. So over the next 10-15 minutes, I'm going to bore you to coma with my monotonous speech, my Persian accent, and saying some very non-controversial things. Let me check this one. Is this one? Yeah. Okay, very good. So the Islamic Republic is at its weakest point. Its economy is in free fall. Its military has been shattered. Its proxy are being demolished. Its security apparatus is deeply infiltrated, and its base of support is constantly shrinking, while majority of Iranians want it gone. And over the last decade, they have shown their willingness to go to streets in order to bring it down. So a revolution is not an abstract notion anymore. It's something in the air. Everyone feels it. Everyone smells it. But do Iranians have a plan to succeed? Yes. The Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi has introduced a 5-point plan to bring down the regime and to rebuild Iran. What are those 5 points? Maximum pressure on the regime from inside and outside through various means to weaken the regime, deprive it of resources that it uses to fund oppression at home and aggression abroad. Isolate it diplomatically, boycott regime-affiliated groups and figures and entities, and put social pressure on them. I think we have been quite successful on that. The max pressure was introduced by the Trump administration. It was mainly economic, but the max pressure that Crown Prince is introducing, it involves the Iranian diaspora. we see that the Iranian diaspora has mobilized. It involves Iranians inside the country to put pressure on the regime. We see it happening. The second part is maximum support for the people of Iran. Again, it has elements outside Iran, like one of the things that we have been advocating for is giving the Iranian people the communication tools that they need when the regime cut off the internet. Unfortunately, we haven't seen foreign government moving on that, but I'm happy to tell you that the Iranian diaspora has actually moved on that. Right now in Iran, we have like tens of thousands of satellite internet, Starlink. Like one of our good friends, Shervin Pishevar, a successful Iranian entrepreneur, is one of the people who have helped to bring these satellite dishes to Iran. So right now, the Islamist regime cannot cut off Iranian totally from the internet. We need more. But the max support, it's not just outside, it's inside. Helping each other inside Iran, helping the families of martyrs, helping the families of political prisoners. The diaspora is doing that. Iranians inside are doing that. We see that. We get a report about that. So the max support is also moving. The third one is the max defection. So to bring down the regime, it's important for us that a section of the regime's military, security, and bureaucracy join the revolution. To do this, the Crown Prince has created a defection platform for members of security, military, and bureaucracy. And so far, I'm happy to report to you that tens of thousands have joined. Their data is being vetted and monitored. They are being contacted. And I think the regime knows it's very vulnerable. And it's really driving the regime crazy. We see that and we hear that from the people that are actually contacting us. And I'm happy to say that we actually have the tools to vet them and analyze them. Then we have the maximum mobilizations of Iranians inside and outside. You have seen it like in diaspora at local levels. More than ever, we have Iranians in different countries, in different cities, organizing, mobilizing, informing the public opinion in their own country, talking to politicians. Then we have the mobilization of political groups. We have seen it in Munich, Munich 1 and Munich 2. Many political groups got together to support the Crown Prince and his vision, signed the 12-point plan. And in Munich 2, we had hundreds of Iranians from different ethnicity, different political background, different positions, different countries, different faiths joining together to support the Crown Prince and to support the cause of freedom in Iran. And then we have the mobilization and organization of revolutionary cells in Iran. That's also going well. We should do much better, but it's happening quite fast and I think at a good pace. And then there is the mass mobilizations of people inside Iran developing tools to be able to talk to them and to be able to mobilizing them, and that's happening too. And the fifth point is Iran Prosperity Project, which is a plan for the day after. That's something that I and my friend are working on, and I will talk about it more. Many Western thought leaders, political leaders, they have been saying that Iranians don't have a leader. There is no one who can lead them. There is no organized opposition. And we know that no revolution can win without leader. Do we have a leader? Yes, we have a leader. And his name is Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. Many may ask why him. First, he's the most popular person in Iran. So we have seen it in polls, both public, private polls that have been conducted by his enemies, by people who don't have any feeling about him or people who support him. The magnitude of his support changes in these polls, but one thing is constant. He is the most popular person in Iran. That never changes, even when his enemies are conducting polls. He's the only one whose name is being chanted, not just his name, his father's name, Mohammad Reza Shah, his grandfather's name, Reza Shah. These have been the fixture of Iran protests over the past 10 years. He's the only one whose name we see on the walls. We don't see anyone else. So that's also a constant. Anyone who follows Iran politics can see that. And then you have the regime itself constantly talking about him. Just last week, Khamenei singled him out, and he actually said that during the war, they have even chosen the next king. So obviously, the next king is talking about him. So his enemies, the regime, its officials, they are talking about him constantly, and they are doing it publicly, and we know that they are doing it privately. He has political support among political groups. As I said, in Munich, more than 50 groups have got together in Munich 1. They signed a 12-point statement saying that they support the Crown Prince and his vision. These are, and in Munich 2, it expanded. These are groups from left to right, from monarchist to Republican. You have a lot of political figures, former MEK, former Fadais. You have like members of different groups from different ethnic background, different faiths. So he has a broad support among the organized political parties. No one else has that. No one else can claim that. He has a global name recognition. Inside Iran, everyone knows him. Outside Iran, the name Pahlavi, most people know that. That's not true about any other political leader. If we can, basically no one else is at his level. Then he's heir to the Pahlavi legacy. That may be a bit strange for non-Iranians to hear that that's a good thing, because for decades there have been disinformation about that. But when Iranians look at the Pahlavi dynasty, what they see is that the Pahlavi era was the only good era in Iran's contemporary history. Before that was the Qajar era. After that is the Islamic Republic era. When you look at the numbers, you see that. You look at the GDP per capita, for example. Iran's real GDP per capita has never gone back to the Pahlavi level. And Iranian people understand that. Talk about Iran's respect in the world. Iranians still say that during the Shah era, they could go to many countries just with their passport. Right now, majority of Iranians want to leave the country. They cannot do it because with the Islamic Republic passport, you can really go anywhere. And the next thing is that he has institutional legitimacy. That's one more thing that he has. Monarchy in Iran is an institution. It's an institution with thousands of years of history. Other institutions in Iran are not working now. What are other institutions? The clergy. The clergy is hated. It's part of the problem. The bazaar, not working. The bureaucracy, many people see it as part of the problem because it's quite incompetent. What people see is that this bureaucracy over the past 4 decades has brought this into Iran. The other one is military. The military itself is part of the problem. So when you have chaos, when the regime falls, you have this institution, the institution of monarchy, that the crown prince represent. And that's an institution that can bring order, and that's an institution that can actually rebuild these other institutions that we need them, because the members of military, who can they go to? To a civil activist? To a women's rights activist? To an ethnic activist? No, they can go to the father of the nation, someone who represents everyone. And the last thing is that he has a plan and he has a team. So for years, people were saying the Iranian opposition doesn't have any plan. The Iranian opposition, as I will show you, has a plan and he has a team. Just in the Iran Prosperity Project, we have been working with 100 people so far. And it's growing and it's expanding. As I told you, through the defection platform, thousands of members of security forces, military forces, people in the bureaucracy has joined that. Those are the people that can be part of the Crown Prince's team when he goes back. Okay, sorry. Can I go back? Okay. So, what is Iran Prosperity Project? Iran Prosperity Project is a project initiated by Crown Prince to develop detailed plans for the future of Iran. The goal is to be prepared to run the country from day one. It sends the message to the Iranian people, to the diaspora, to the international community that Iran, after the Islamic Republic, will not face constant chaos. This plan focuses on stabilizing the country, restoring prosperity to Iran, and identifying opportunities for workers, entrepreneurs, and everyone, Iranians and non-Iranians. There are tons of opportunities in Iran for non-Iranians, lots of investment opportunities. So, what's the time window for this plan? We have a phase 1, which is changing government, emergency phase, months 0 to 6. Then we have short-term stabilization. We expect it to end between 24 months to 36 months. So let's get the ceiling. It would be 6 to 36 months. And then you have the long-term reforms, which comes after 36 months. In terms of topics, so we have governance transformation, and we have economic social stabilization, we have industrial revitalization, and foundational stabilization. So basically, you have 2 groups, then it turns into 6 groups. It covers a lot of topics, from political transition to oil and gas production, to financial markets, to tourism, to environment. So far, what we have produced 2 batches of paper. The first batch were 6 papers focused on economic, how do we stabilize the economy, plus healthcare and welfare. So that, I think, was around 150, 200 pages. So that's a very detailed plan for those who say the Iranian opposition doesn't have a plan. The second batch of papers, it's called the emergency phase, day 0 to month 6. Basically, what are the crises that we will face? What are the mitigation strategies? How are we going to solve those crises? And how are we going to lay the foundation for the more long-term reform? So that's called our emergency booklet. It has around 170 pages, very detailed. Covers 15 topics, from political transition to security and military reform, to foreign policy, to environment, and so on. Sorry. Okay, so I want to talk about political transition a little bit. So what we envision here is that the Crown Prince would be in our political transition booklet. He's called the leader of the national uprising. So that's an institutional position, our booklet. So before the fall, he's going to establish 2 institutions. One is the temporary executive team, and the other one is the National Uprising Council. The National Uprising Council is an advisory council. The executive team is the team that is going to make things done. What happened to the next slide? Sorry. Okay, so we have some goals for this transition period. So basically what we want to do, we want to bring stability, we want to stabilize the country, bring security, and on the other hand, we want to move toward the democracy as soon as possible. So what we do here is that we give the transitional system the power that it needs to stabilize the country, but on the other hand, we are going to have elections, a referendum, as soon as possible, so we can move quickly to give the power back to the people. During the transition, so the leader of the national uprising, the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, is going to lead 3 institutions: the transitional judiciary, the transitional government, and the National Uprising Council. The National Uprising Council remains from the past. The transitional government replaces the temporary executive team, and the transition judiciary, it's a new organization that will be created. And this is the flow chart of how things are going to happen. So this is before, and this is after. So 4 months after the fall of the regime, we will have a referendum. People will choose whether they want monarchy or they want republic. This has faced some backlash from both monarchists and Republicans. Some of our Republican friends, they believe that the only legitimate form of government is a republic. Some of our monarchist friends have the same belief. The Crown Prince, as he has been saying for 4 decades, is fighting to restore the choice that Iranian people have to decide what they want, whether it's monarchy or republic. Everyone should accept. After these 4 months, you have the type of the regime. 2 months after it, you are going to have the election for the Constituent Assembly. There will be an election. Again, some of our friends are saying that an election for Constituent Assembly, it's not good because people don't know how to write a constitution. Crown Prince does not believe in that. Crown Prince believes people choose the form of the government and people will choose their representative to write the constitution. Then they have 6 to 12 months to write the constitution. When they are done, there will be another referendum after 1 month. If people ratify that constitution, then we will have a new constitution. If people reject that, the Constituent Assembly will have 3 months to write a new constitution. If people reject that again, then there should be a new election. That's there to make sure that people who go to the assembly, they actually follow what the people have asked them, so they don't do whatever they want. And after that, when you have your referendum, if it's monarchy, you will have coronation plus election for the parliament. If it's a republic, you will have an election for president and an election for parliament. And then you will have the new transitional government, and that transitional government take over, and the transition period is over. I'm not going to bother you with the last slide, but what I wanted to tell you is that we have developed these goals and we have developed very detailed deliverables for each of them. So this way we are going to measure whether the transitional government is successful or not, whether in lifting the sanctions, are they successful? In having the elections, are they successful? In taking over the military and security places, they are successful. In ending the water problem, they are successful. In ending the electricity shortages, they are successful. So we have a very detailed deliverables for each of the 15 sections that we have. And thank you so much for your time. And at the end, I hope that you take this message with you, that the Iranian opposition has a leader, the Iranian opposition is organized, the Iranian opposition has a team and a plan, and they are ready to bring down the regime and lead the country toward peace, prosperity, and better future.
Thank you, Saeed. We welcome you all to a brief break for some much-needed coffee.
خب یه بریک خوبی اینجا میگیره. به نظر من که خیلی خوب شروع کردن. فکر میکنم که شاهزاده رضا پهلوی اینجا یک صحبت 1 ساعته فکر میکنم که دارن. حالا من برنامه رو دقیقاً نمیدونم. اگر دوستان کسی میخواد تشریف بره بالا تشریف بیارید شما رو هم بشنویم. جناب جلوانی دیدم سوالاتون ها، یعنی فکر میکنم بعد این مقدار صبورتر بود که حالا یه پرزنتیشن تموم بشه. نظرتون چیه؟ من حالا بذارین اول آدیمو عوض کنم. من و تو فارسیشو داشته باشه ولی نداره. به نظر من که مطالب بسیار خوبی رو صحبت کردن و خلاصش دیگه اینطوری. حالا من میخوام یه موزیک پخش میکنم تا اینکه اینا از بریک برگردن، یا نمیدونم دوستان میخواد برید جای دیگه بعد برگردید، حالا هر چی که هست. من که اتاق باز نگه میدارم که تا این بچه ها برگردن. نکته که خیلی خوشم آمد این بودش، اون میزه گردی که داشتن مدام صحبت سر این که ملت ایران باید خودشون تصمیمشون رو بگیرن. یه سری ببین پیغام خیلی شفاف اومد بیرون، اینکه چقدر الان زمان حال مهمه. یعنی مثلا از میدونید الان اینجا هست که به نظر من کارنامه‌های سیاسی افراد نوشته میشه. مثلا در زمانهایی که شاه ایران یا رهبر انقلاب ملی با ساپورتشون، با ساپورت ما از تمام کارهایشون و کارهایی که بتونیم هم معقولانه باشه هم به نفع انقلاب باشه در اون ردیف کار کنیم. خب افرادی که این کارا رو نمی‌کنن میرن میشینن تو اتاق فحاشا از صبح تا شب مثلا هستن تو این اتاق، یا اینکه میرن نمیدونم توی کارهای دیگه و مثلا حاشیه میسازن و اینا همین میره توی کارنامه‌های سیاسی افراد. من شخصا فردا اگه بخوام برای کسی رأی بدم که مثلا بره مجلس یا جای دیگه 100% به این افراد رأی نمیدم. اتفاقا اسمشون هم مینویسم که آقا در زمانی که شاه ایران رهبر انقلاب ملی ایران نیاز به ساپورت ملی داره که بتونه قدرتش رو افزون بکنه، چنین کسایی مثلا اون تجربه خودم تو کلاب هست، اینم لیستش توی سوشال میدیا هم همینطور. اتفاقا اینجا الان این لحظه ها بعد هم آدم خود کار خودش اونقدر خوب و قوی انجام بده. اگرم میبینی که کسای دیگه هم نمیدونم خیلی مزاحمت ایجاد میکنن، اونا هم باید در آینده ایران نمیشه که اینطوری که نمیشه. اگه ما نتونیم کنار هم وایسیم بلد نباشیم، فکر میکنم یه اسکور کارت لازم داره. یه اسکور کارت، فقط این که آدم بخواد بیاد بگه ملی ام میهن پرستم و نمیدونم من میخوام ایران رو آزاد کنم، کلام که زیبا، ما که بچه که نیستیم که. مردم داخل ایران دارن هزینه میدن، ایران داره از دست میره، لحظات بسیار حساسیه. اگر بلد نیستیم راه نشون بدیم که کسی هم نخواسته راه نشون بدیم، حداقل که بلدیم که حمایت کنیم که. پس من فکر میکنم که به اندازه آدم بزرگی که هستیم بتونیم کار خودمون رو بکنیم و مقاله بنویسیم به زبانهای غیر فارسی یا حتی فارسی، توی سوشال میدیا همراه باشیم برای اینکه یه سری ترند هایی باید بالا بیاد. مثلا من الان نمیدونم، از خودتون بپرسید امروز اصلا هشتگ سایرس اکورد زدید، پیمان کوروش، برای اینکه این بستر گفتگو شاهزاده رضا پهلوی رضا شاه دوم که من میگم هست. و مثلا در مورد همین دفترچه حمایت بکنیم. من میبینم بچه ها اتاق زدن اینجا در مورد دفترچه صحبت میکنن. کسای دیگه هم هستن که اینجا اتاق میزنن توی کلاب هاوس مثلا میگم که اتاق میزنن و نمیدونم والا میخوان دیبیت کنن با کسایی که مخالفن. شخصا نمیتونم بگم خوبه یا بده، انتخاب افراده. ببین با همون انتخاب افراد هم افراد کارنامه سیاسیشون معلوم میشه دیگه، میدونی. و من امیدوارم که ما یه ملت هوشمندی باشیم، چیزایی رو که یاد میگیریم که اشتباه بوده تکرار نکنیم. افرادی رو که میبینیم کارهای اشتباه انجام میدن نذاریمشون توی شغلای درست. در آینده ایران خیلی جاها هستش که خب بالاخره فرصتایی پیش میاد که افراد بتونن یه کارایی حتما انجام بدن دیگه. خیلی متوجه باشیم که یک مشت خال زنک یا میدونید افرادی که نمیتونن متمرکز باشن رو برای ایرانمون نذاریم در آینده. در صورت من شخصا خودم دارم امروز نگاه میکنم، یعنی مثلا من خودم یک ماهی هستم نگاه میکنم ببینم چجوری ماجرا. پیغام بسیار شفافه، بسیار واضحه، همونطور که الان براتون پخش کردم. به نظر خودم دارم میگم بسیار واضحه پیغام که چیکار باید بکنیم. اگه کسی نمیدونه بیاد سوال کنه، اگه کسی میدونه ولی هنوز مثلا مشکوکی که شاید راهش به درد میخوره یا نه، بازم بیاد صحبت کنیم. ولی از اینکه صبح تا شب حرف بزنیم، شب تا صبح حرف بزنیم و کاری در سمت قدرتمند کردن رهبری انقلاب ملی یا کارهایی که دارن رضا شاه دوم انجام میدن انجام ندیم، درست نیست دیگه. من فکر می‌کنم این اسکور کارت چیز بدی نیست. من میخوام پیشنهاد کنم شاید اصلا یه چیزی باشه که آدم بین نمیدونم حتی همونطوری معمولی هم شاید بشه درستش کرد، مثل یک کارنامه کاری. میدونی اگه مثلا یه کسایی میرن همش بغل فحاشان دنبال اون میگن دنبال این میگن، یه 4 تا مزدور اون وسط گیر میارن که واقعا مزدورن، یعنی آدم باید کر و کور باشه که نفهمه اینا مزدورن. نمیدونم آیا این کارنامه سیاسیه؟ ضرری که میده در زمینه دیاسپورا چقدره؟ این اتاقای غیبت نمیدونم چی خال زنک بازی که البته این کلمه درستی نیست، به عنوان یک فمینیست خال زنک کلمه درستی نیست، ولی حالا anyways حالا ترم معمولی استفاده کردم، میذارن و از این صحبت میکنن، دنبال این میگن دنبال اون میگن. من اگه از ایران بیام این اتاقا رو گوش بدم خب پیش خودم میگم آقا اینا چی، اینا علافن، چی ماجرا، ما به هوای اینکه مثلا چجوری ماجرا، مثلا برنامه ای هست نیست، چون که دشمن بسیار بسیار اه، پول دستشه و میدونی بسیار بسیار فعالانه میخواد که این خبرهای مهم رو چیز کنه، بگید شما خاموش کنه. خب انتخاب من و شماه که اجازه بدیم خاموش بشه نشه، همراهی با کی میخوایم بکنیم، اصلا خودمون اصلا همراهی با هیچ کم نکنیم، در حد تک نفرم افراد میتونن کمک کنن به انقلاب ایران. گفتم مقاله بنویسین، نمیدونم در جریان هشتگ را انداختن، کامنت گذاشتن زیر اکانت های غیر فارسی زبان، چون که ما الان این هژمونی که در داخل دیاسپورا داره اتفاق میفته با ملت شریف ایران، با رضا شاه دوم، خب ما با ساپورت خارجی رو هر چقدر که بیشتر داشته باشیم بهتره برامون دیگه. منتها این حرکت های ما در خارج، مثلا من یه خانومی بود اینجا قبلا والا ما فکر می‌کردیم پادشاهی خواهر، البته من اصلا از روش بندیش خوشم نمیومد، مسئله شخصی نبود اصلا، anyways حالا حتما اونم همینطوره. الان میبینم توی اکس الان کار تمام وقت شده که بره دنبال تیم شاهزاده رضا پهلوی، رضا شاه دوم که من میگم آقا اصلا تیمش بد. موضوع اینجاست که مگه شاه ما این رو نمیدونه؟ اصلا اگر این افراد نبودن، این افراد میگن که چون که ما جورجتاون رو نبودیم به هم نمیخورد، بی خود میگن. میدونی یک فرضیه اشتباهه، یک فرضیه غلطیه. اگر این افراد نبودن جورجتاون به هم میخورد. چرا؟ چون جورجتاون ستون فقرات جمهوری اسلامیه، ضد اسرائیله و اولین سفری که شاهزاده رضا پهلوی رضا شاه دوم که من میگم میکردن به اسرائیل، کلا خودش میرفت به فنا. اتفاقا حرکتی که به نظر من رضا شاه دوم کردن بسیار بسیار حرکت درستی بود، چون که افرادی مثل من، خیلی مثل من که قبلا سیاسی کار نکردن، وقتی این حرکت رو از شاه ایران دیدن نه بابا، مثلا همه پروپاگاندایی که قبلی که حالا من خیلیش مثلا نشنیدم، نه نظری دیدم نه هیچی، ولی نشون دادن که چه فرد دموکراتی هستن، چه فرد اوپن مایندی هستن. معلومه اون اصلا یه روز دیگه هم ادامه پیدا نمی‌کرد، برای اینکه ستون فقرات تفکر متفاوت بود، ضد اسرائیلن اونا. خب تموم. شاه که میرفت یه سفر اسرائیل، اون گروه به هم میریخت. من نمیدونم این آدمایی که الان فول تایمشون شده که برن دنبال تیم رضا شاه دوم، اصلا شما بگو این تیمش بده، مگه شاه خودش متوجه نیست؟ انقدر این حرکت های افراد غیر حرفه‌ای، بچگانه، اصلا من نمیتونم ملتفت شم که این حرکت چی. حالا خدا رو شکر که همه اینطور نیستن ها، میدونین تعدادشون کمن، ولی توی همین کلاب هاوس که من با خیلی آشنا شدم دیگه، دیدم همینجا همین گروه فحاشا یکی از این خانم‌ها رو بولد کرده بود و من تو چندین اتاق دیدمش توی سالگردنی و صحبت میکرد، معلوم بود طرف معلوم نیست بنده خدا چجوری کجاست الان با کدوم حزبه، ولی من که هیچ وقت نزدیک نشدم، ولی الان میبینم بعد از 2 سال چجوریه ماجرا. چرا باید افراد این کارو بکنن؟ نمیدونم چجوری بعد مدیریتش کرد. منم بهش توی سوشال مدیا نمیپردازم، الانم اولین باره که میگم، ولی واسه این میگم چون که الان 3 روز پشت سر هم رفتم توییتر نگاه میکنم، میبینم چقدر وقیح. ما میخوایم جمهوری اسلامی وقیح رو از ایران بیرون بندازیم. چی شدیم؟ خودمون شدیم حالا وقیح. یعنی شعور این که بخوایم بریم اصلا بگو از دفترچه بدم میاد، از هر چی که هست برو بذار کامنت بذار 45 روز بگذره. حتما که آدم به قول انگلیسی هم میگه don't air your laundry، یعنی انقدر این حرکت های غیر پروفشنال، اصلا وقیح. من نمیتونم متوجهشم. یعنی یه کسی فکر میکنه اگر اینطوری دعوا رو انداز وقیح نباشه حرفش شنیده نمیشه. اصلا حرفش بخواد شنیده بشه، بنده شخصا میکنم افرت که کمپین باشه که حرفش شنیده نشه. میگه مردم ایران داخل ایران اعصابشون از سر راه آوردن، یا بقیه مبارزا که نه پولی میگیرن نه چیزی، میان دارن کار میکنن، میخوان ایران رو آزاد کنن. خب هر وقتی یه کسی میاد این وسط یه ساز ناجور میزنه، نمیدونم، من جای شاه نیستم، مثلا نمیتونم تصور کنم ایشون چه حسی دارن. خیلی خیلی ناشکری. آخه اینا کلمه‌های چیز دینیه، ولی در هر صورت کاری درستی نیست. اما خودمون رو فکر میکنم مسئول نگه داریم کافیه. من میگم اسمم ندادم، نمیخوام به دیگران بپردازم، ولی اه، اه، من بخوام خودم مسئول نگه دارم، مثلا اینجا اتاق دادم واسه این خانومه که اول اسمش رس، حالا تو همون دسته اون که بی اخلاص اتاق زدن. مگه ما نمیدونیم این زنه که چیکار کرده چی گفته؟ مگه مثلا الان رفتیم مزدوری درجه 2 برش گیر آوردیم؟ آقا بیکارید، برید اتاق بزنید که کار ازش در بیاد. دنبال این خانوم من فلان، آی باباش اومد اعلام کرد که اینش بده این خوبه. من اگه تو داخل ایران باشم بیام توی اینجا کلاب هاوس، میگم اینا اصلا نمیدونن داستان چیه. در حالی که شاه ایران در حال کار کردنه، در حالی که برنامه داره میره جلو. من فکر نمی کنم که پیغام داخل ایران به این واضحی داره، شفافی داره ارائه داده میشه. آیا ما کمک کردیم در این شفاف ارائه دادن؟ من فکر نمی کنم ما کمک زیاد کردیم. آیا میدونیم بیشتر کمک کنیم؟ من فکر میکنم میتونیم. این اتاقهای حاشیه هستش که رژیم میزنه رژیم بزنه، ولی ما اگه بتونیم حالا حداقل حاشیه هم میخوایم کار کنیم، این مدل حاشیه باشه که بعد از اینکه جمهوری اسلامی رفته، حالا دارم چیز میکنم، ولی به هر صورت دوستان اینه دیگه. من فقط میخواستم این در دل رو بکنم و واقعا دیگه بچه که نیستیم که دیگه، فکر میکنم که ماجرا از اونجا گذشته که بخوایم. من شخصا از تصمیم گرفتم الان یه چند هفته است که برای خودم اکشن نشستم، اسم نوشتم که این افرادی که در یه سری اتاقایی میرن به خصوص اتاقای فحاشا، ببین چون که اینا به اسم پادشاهی خواه میان، این خیلی مهمه. ما میخوایم که قسمت براندازمون یه کار منسجم انجام بده. اینها وقتی که با این روشمندی به کجا رسوندن؟ به کجا رسوندن واقعا ما رو؟ یعنی من اگه کور باید باشم یا کر، یا واقعا از آیکیوم 0 باشه که نتونم بفهمم منظرپور مثلا چیزه، بگید شما مورد داره. ولی ما که پیشش نمی نشستیم، همینا میرفتن پیشش می نشستن. این اصلا ما واسه چی میخوایم این افرادی رو؟ واسه چی هستن؟ حالا اینا کنار، اونی که اتاق رژیمیا، برید ریپورت کنید دیگه. والا من هر وقت که خودم میام که ریپورت میکنم. من شخصا فکر میکنم که سخته. من توی اتاقای دیدم که اگه برم روی استیج متاسفانه حالا به هر صورتی مادریت هم بکنن، من اونجا میرم فقط واسه این که حرف خودم رو بزنم و میام بیرون. والا اگه کسی میتونه حرف خودشو بزنه، من فکر میکنم حرف خودم شاید بجا باشه اونجا، ولی در حد صورت پیغام باید بسیار شفاف منتقل بشه به داخل ایران که چی؟ که ما sense of urgency داریم، که همونطور که صحبتایی که اینجا گفته شد، ما شرایطی داریم که بسیار رایپه، بسیار مثل فرصت، همون فرصت طلاییه. اون چیزی که گفتم که اون بچه که کنار پنجره هست، اون مثالی که همیشه میذارم اونطوریه. شما علاف این شدیم که آقا این آدم بزرگا توی خونه اون پشت زد، آی نه یکی جا خالی داد، نه اونم 4 تا مش برگردون. بچه کنار پنجره داره از دست میره. مملکت ما، ایرانیای داخل ایران دارن چیکار کنیم ما؟ الان مثلا مدهوش این باشیم که آقای مثلا فلان کسک چی گفت به آقای بهمان کسک؟ نه دیگه. آیا ما پیغام شاهمون رو شفاف میفرستیم که چی؟ که ایشون برنامه دارن که اگه ما با یک قسمتی مخالفیم میتونیم نظرمون رو بدیم، وایسیم اگه نظرمون مثلا هچل حرف شد، اصلا مد نظر گرفته نشد. یه کانسپتی هست توی منطقه تو آمریکا من میدونم، میگن agree to disagree. ببین شما کادیلاک هم بیاری بدی به من، اگه من دوچرخه سوار باشم دوچرخه فقط میتونم سوار شم. حالا شما دوچرخه رو برو بده به یه کسی که کادیلاک سوار میشه، آره اون موقع ممکنه بگه چی فکر کردی، مثلا من چیم، مثلا من دوچرخه سوارم، من میخوام زودتر برسم به مسیرم. اینقدر مسائل شخصی نکنیم دیگه. مسئله ایران وسطه و من فکر میکنم که الان این کنفرانس خیلی مناسبه. من تا اینجاش که گوش دادم sense of urgency هست. یعنی چی؟ یعنی مسئله حساسی وسطه. جناب تلفنی شما اومدین بالا، صحبت شما رو بشنویم.
سلام و درود و تشکر و با امید به این که همه سلامت باشن و بتونن که کار انجام بدن. ببینین من نمیدونم چه موانعی وجود داره از لحاظ سیاسی قانونی، ولی تو سیستم دستگاه بین المللی، ولی من نمیدونم چرا شاهزاده تا حالا یک دولت یا نمیدونم حکومت در تبعید تشکیل ندادن. من نمیدونم. خب کسی هم نتونست من جواب به من بده. من سوال کردم جاهایی. خب یه نخست
یه لحظه
وزیر
وایس،
بوده
یه
که
لحظه وایس، یه دقیقه وایس. بذار من یه دونه آدیو براتون بذارم. یه لحظه. اوکی. مرسی که این سوال خوب کردین. بذارید من یه لحظه این آدیو رو براتون بذارم، اجازه بدین، برای اینکه نمیخوام همینجا، میخوام که سوالتون رو اگه اجازه هست همینجا پاسخ بدیم اون بره. یه دقیقه وایسین برای من، معذرت میخوام. حالا که من به نظر میاد که نتونم اون آدیو هرم گیر بیارم. صبر کنین یه لحظه، الان دارم نزدیک میشم بهش، فکر میکنم خیلی نزدیکم به عبارتی. دلوانی شما فکر کنم که صحبت کنید، برای اینکه من دسترسی ندارم متاسفانه. آره ببخشید.
خب ببینین، من معتقدم که اگه که موانع بین المللی قانون نداره، شاهزاده میتونه یک دولت موقت، حکومت موقت در تبعید تشکیل بده، نخست وزیر، ادمنستریشن همون دیگه، وزرا، اینها تا در سطحی مثلا معاونیشون. بعد قضیه میتونست به این صورت بشه که بیاد تو ستون فقرات قرار بگیره، یعنی یه دستگاه، این دستگاه مجریه میشه. خب بعد یه دستگاه قضاییه، دستگاه قضایی جودیشری سیستم، اونجا میگه که یک عده رو، یک تیم رو معرفی بکنن. بعد در مورد قوه مقننه، اون حالا چیز دیگه میمونه، چون که قوه مقننه اون تکنیکا و تاکتیکای خودشو داره. نمیشه مثلا الان شاهزاده بیا اونا رو انتخاب بکنه، اون کار مردمه دیگه. البته شاید بتونن یکی هم بذارن به عنوان مثلا سنی، به عنوان سنی، یک کسی که یه چهره که مقبولیت عمومی داره، اونم بذارن حالا برای مثلا موقت برای مؤسسان، که مثلا مثل که سنش بالا باشه و اینا بگن که فعلا بیاد مؤسسان رو اداره کنه تا اون مجلسی که اون سنا یا مؤسسان یا هرچی تا کار پیش بره، یعنی بیاد تو سه تا قوه قرار بگیره تا حدودی. دوتاش که ممکنه به نظر من، جودیسریش و چون قضایی، دستگاه قضایی و قوه مجریه. و من نمیدونم تا حالا چه موانعی وجود داشته، ولی این میتونه به مردم نشون بده که خب یه چیزی هست که قابل عرضه است. این تیم های اقتصادی و اینها میان میگن ما میخوایم کار انجام بدیم، خیلی خوبه و منم بهش اعتقاد دارم که شاهزاده حتما میتونه اینها رو چیکار کنه، مدیریت و رهبری بکنه و کار انجام بده. ولی باید یه مقدار اتنتیکیت تر باشه برای که مردم بتونن اینو لمس بکنن. و این حکومت، این دستگاه قضاییشه، این دستگاه مجریشه، این هم فعلا به طور موقت اینها چیز میشن، معرفی میشن، نخست وزیر، نمیدونم وزرا، تا حدودی که ممکنه. این به مردم یه مقدار قوت قلب میده و چیز میده، ایمیجینیشن میده، ایدیا میده. ملاحظه میکنه. ولی خب الان یه هی میان میرن افراد خیلی متخصص بالایی هم هستن، میان صحبت میکنن، میگن ما این کار رو میتونیم بکنیم اینطوریه اینا، ولی باز هم چیز نداره، نمیتونه یه تفکر ارگانایزد ایجاد بکنه. این نظر منه، باشه آدم اشتباه بکنه. خیلی متشکرم. حالا اگه کسی انتقادی داره بفرمایید.
نه میتونم ببینم موردی که شما دارید میگید، میتونیم جواب بدیم که آقا مثلا شما الان کی اوکی سینا، آره ببینید من میتونم ملتفت بشم که مثلا شما میگید الان این مدلی باشه مردم مثلا خیلی متحول میشن. ببین اول که میگم به شما، ما نقش خودمون رو در این مدلی کردنش که مفهوم رو برای ساده تر بکنیم یا شفافیت ایجاد کنیم در این مطالب نقش داریم ما که خودمون انجام بدیم. ولی اینی که شما میگید مثلا آیا یه کسی بیاد اونجا از سن مختلف تو گروه باشه، میتونم این رو ببینم مستر جلوانی که ملتفتم. مثلا شما میگید یه مقدار شاید یه سری افراد جدیدی به گروهشون چیز شه، بگو اضافه بشه، من ملتفت میشم نقطه نظر شما رو به عنوان یک نظر. خب ولی بعد از خودمون بپرسیم آیا این مورد لازمه یا ما الان کافی داریم؟ ببینید ما به قول انگلیسی هم میگه ویش لیست، شما لیست آرزومندی دارین و شما نید لیست دارین، یعنی که لیست احتیاج. ملتفتین آیا ما اگه لیست احتیاج رو تموم کرده باشیم، لیست آرزومندی به این نیستش که الان آرزوت مثلا نه، اتفاقا بعضی موقع آیتمایی که روی لیست آرزومندیه اون لیست میدونید احتیاج رو خیلی قوی میکنه، خیلی خوبم جاش میندازه. ولی فکر میکنم بنا به اون منابعی که در دسترس داریم بیایم لیستمون رو بکنیم لیست نیاز. حالا آرزومندی میتونه چی باشه؟ من نمیگم چیزی که شما میگید آرزومندی هست یا نه ها، ولی مثلا ممکنه این باشه که مثلا این فلان کسکم باید بیاد، مثلا بهمان کسک نیست چرا نیست، اونم باید باشه، مثلا از این سنم باید بیاد. به احتمال خیلی زیاد اگه همه اینا اتفاق بیفته بسیار میدونید پروسه بهتر میشه و من مخالف نیستم، ولی ما در یه جایی باید بگیم که کافی رسیدیم که بعد اون کافیه رو میخوایم ببریم درجه بالاتر بهترش کنیم. ملتفتی من فکر میکنم الان کافی رسیدیم، این نظر شخصی. ما رهبر انقلاب ملی داریم، ما الان از اون تهدیدهای معتبر داریم دیگه. اول اینکه رضا شاه دوم هستن دیگه، ایشون میدونید رهبر انقلاب ملی هستن، معتمد ملت شریف ایران، ملت بسیار ملیگرا شده در این چند سال اخیر، ظلم‌های جمهوری اسلامی بسیار آشکاره، در نتیجه ما میتونیم در خارج از ایران خیلی میتونه کار خوبی خیلی بچه‌ها انجام دادن، خبررسانی کردن. خود شخص رهبر انقلاب ملی رضا شاه دوم خیلی کار خوبی کرد. خب اینا آیا کافیه؟ به نظر من این چیز کافی میفته هنوز، ولی کافی نیست. ببین وقتی که این مونیخ حماسه مونیخ آخری اتفاق افتاد، به نظر من اون مایلستون بود. میدونی چی میگم؟ به نظر من اون خیلی مهم بود. یعنی شما از اون تکثر بالاتر نمیتونی ببینی. تکثر به این نیستش که اگه من بله نسبت شما رو نمیگم من، ولی شما منظورم حالا شما نیستید، اگه شما اونطوری فکر میکنید که دیگه مشکل شماست. ولی مثلا تکثر به این نیستش که مثلا کسایی که 57 انداختن راه انداختن حتما تو این برنامه بیان مثلا نظرشون رو اگه بدن بعد ما تکثر افکار داریم. خیر اینطور نیست. تکثر الان شما اونجا دیدید که از جهت اینکه کسایی که از لول‌های مختلف برای انقلاب ملی ما هزینه دادن از گروه‌های سیاسی مختلف، به نظر من مونیخ حماسه مونیخ 2 خیلی قوی بود. دفترچه‌ای هم که ازش اومد بیرون یک روشمندی، حالا من نظر خودم دارم ولی هستش که خب بخواد اشتراک بذاره که ما برنامه‌ای داریم. شما میگید که ای کاش مثلا بیشتر توضیح میداد، ای کاش دولت داشتن. من مخالف نیستم ولی ببینید اینی که اتفاق نیفتاده، من بر این باورم که رضا شاه دوم از من، حتما از شما هم شاید حالا من اینطوری فکر می‌کنم، از ما که مردم عادی هستیم خیلی خیلی لولش بالاتره، نه از اینکه عذر میخوام دوستا ببخشید خب برای همه اینجور آدم درست نه که میگم الان ژن مخصوصه، افراد برای اینکه میافتن توی خودشونو این مقدار تحلیلشون ضعیفه میچسبونن اونوری، نه به علت اینکه دسترسی دارن، به علت اینکه در اون لول داره رهبری انقلاب ملی میکنه. خب پس یعنی ایشون اطلاعاتش از من قوی تره. فکر میکنم که حتما به این مورد فکر کردن، حتما باور کنید مستر جلوانی حتما به این مورد فکر کردن و حتما این مد نظره. و من میخواستم اتفاقا صداشون رو پخش کنم از حماسه مونیخ که ببینید که اتفاقا صحبت کردن. 2 تا مورد که در میاد حالا در مورد گروه براندازی، ملتفت اون مدیریت اون و قدم‌های بعدی و کمک مالی اگر هموطنان میتونن بکنن، در نتیجه داره ارگنایز میشه و فکر میکنم اینا خیلی هدف‌های بزرگیه. ولی باز میخوام بگم به اینکه شما میگی تصویرش معلوم نیست، این رو بعد از خودمون بپرسیم. تصویره رو منتظر کدوم تصویره ایم؟ شما رو نمیخوام بزنم رو اثباتا، ولی این از اون چیزاست که ما توی 46 سال جمهوری اسلامی واژه‌ها رو از ما دزدیده، برای ما فکر کرده، به ما گفته چی باید چه جوری باشه که درسته. ببین 57 مردم فکر نکردن. چرا؟ چون مملکت داشت در جریان بود، خیلی چیزا داشت درست انجام میشد. اینی که در آینده ما انقلاب کنیم داشت قرار بود بریم آب مجانی بگیریم و برق مجانی دیگه. ملتفتیم ما الان از یه شرایط ویران شده، اینی که بخوایم از اینجا در بیام، افراد میگن نمیدونم از این بدتر مگه میشه، در یه شرایط مفلوک هستیم الان. حالا اوکی ما میتونیم تا یه مقداری بگیم آقا ما این برنامه رو داریم، به نظر من الان کافیه، به نظر من دارم میگم برنامه کافیه. الان شما میگید که دولت رو معرفی کنه، من فکر میکنم اگر شاه ایران در این همه سال، ببینید شاه ایران که بودن دیگه، اگه تا این همه سال رهبری انقلاب ملی رو به عهده نگرفتن و امروز به عهده گرفتن و شما میبینید که مثل بنز داره کار میکنه، جمع میشن افراد، نمیدونم محتوا تولید میکنن، دارن کارا رو انجام میدن، علمی داره پیش میره، بسیار شایسته سالاری به نظر من. آره خیلی ایرادام داره، 100% ایراد داره، 100% ایراد داره. حالا نمیخوام برم، ولی منظورم که گروه های دیگه 100% ایراد دارم، ولی در صورت اوورال من میگم که چیزی کافی اتفاق افتاده و به نظر من اگر شاه ایران در چنین روزی جناب جلوانی اومده وسط، شخصی نبوده که بخواد همینطوری خودشو وسط بندازه. حتما داره دولتی که شما مد نظرتون هست و میاد. حالا این که چرا ایشون تو حالا معرفی نکرده من میتونم بفهمم چرا. والا به خدا یه دفترچه 160 صفحه‌ای معرفی کردن. شما ببین این اتفاقا به نظر من یه رفلکشن باید باشه برای ما ایرانی‌ها به جای دیفلکشن. میدونی که ما بگیم دفترچه اومد، اول از همه بسم الله، که قبل از اینکه بخوایم بریم بزنیم بگیم دفترچه بیچارگی من خیلی از دست آقای دکتر طاهری دلخورم، خیلی زیاد خیلی زیاد خیلی زیاد خیلی بی‌معرفتی کردن تو این جریان، اصلا کارشون درست نیست. حالا افراد میگن اینا از اول هم همینطوری بودن، اوکی بابا، همه دارن ماشاءالله، من از همه کمتر میدونم، ولی موضوع اینجاست که من خیلی دلخورم از دست ایشون. در اصل میخوام جنبندی بکنم که ببین الان ببینید شما دیگه، حالا فرض کن کابینه‌شو معرفی کنه، فکر می‌کنین چی میشه؟ آیا کابینه‌شو بعد من و شما تایید کنیم یا رهبر انقلاب ملی؟ آیا ما به رهبر انقلاب ملی اونقدر اعتماد داریم که بتونیم این کارو بکنیم؟ آیا اونقدر اعتماد داریم به خودمون که الان مملکت تو آتیشه بتونیم اون بچه رو از بغل پنجره در برش داریم بیاریمش بیرون، وطنمون رو نجات بدیم؟ متفقین چی میخوام بگم؟ من فکر میکنم این ریالیتی چیه که بعد با ما اتفاق بیفته. نمیدونم تونستم منظورم برسم. این ما مشکل با ما، تک تک ما. چه چیزی منتظرشیم؟ منتظر چی هستیم؟ ببین برای که اونجا بعد لول ست بشه. مثلا من یادم میاد وقتی من اول تو این کار انقلاب وارد شدم، همین گفتن انقلاب کنیم، انقلاب. میگفتم آقا این کلمه سنگینه. شما انقلاب رو الان تعریف کن، تصویری که توی ذهنت میاد از انقلاب چیه؟ آقا شاید تصویر اصلا اشتباهه. انقلاب کردن چه چیزی باید اتفاق بیفته جلوی چشمای شما که اصلا مثلا بگی انقلاب شده؟ اوکی بیاین صحبت کنیم در موردش. حالا اون که مال اون موقع بود، ولی الان شما میگین بعد دولت بیاد، نمیدونم فلان. اوکی بیاین صحبت کنیم. آیا واقعا این کافیه؟ یعنی ما آیا کافی رو نرسیدیم بهش؟ به نظر من رسیدیم. به نظر شخص خودم ما به یک شرایط کافی رسیدیم. ما تهدید معتبر دستمون در کل تاریخ که این مطلب اتفاق نیفتاده، ما در شرایط بسیار بسیار بهینه قرار گرفتیم که بتونیم این کار رو انجام بدیم اگه قرار انجام بدیم، و جمهوری اسلامی هم بسیار بسیار از این به این آگاه. حالا به هر صورت من اینو گفتم خیلی طول کشید جناب جلوانی، اگه شما کامنتی هست بفرمایید، وگرنه که من الان برنامه شروع میشه میخوام که بقیه‌اش هم بزنم که با هم بشنویم. این جناب من چت رو نگاه نمی‌کنم. من امیدوارم که آقای سینا من نمیفهم شما جناب جلوانی، شما فکر میکنی الان ما نوع سیستم سیاسی مد نظرمون باید باشه؟ صدای من اصلا میاد؟ نمیاد.
نه اصلا. من
خب
الان فکر
نه من
میکنم
میخوام از
وارد.
الان صبر کنی. شما میدونی که نباید باشه، درسته؟
بله.
خب الان سینا فکر میکنه باید باشه و شما تجربه زیستی خودتون رو دارین، ایشون هم تجربه زیستی خودش. اگر ایشون شما رو هی پروب کنه، به نظر شما باید واردش بشین؟ به نظر من نه. من ببخشید عذر میخوام، آف کورس که شما خودت واسه خودت تصمیم بگی، ولی میدونین چی میخوام بگم؟ ما تمرکزی هر تک تکمون اگر مثل رول مدل خودمون رفتار کنیم، تمرکز. آقا سیستم نیست الان بحثش. اگه الان میخوایم بحث سیستم بکنیم من مشکل ندارم. من الان با آقای جلوانی بحث میکنم حسابی سر اینکه پادشاهی اتفاق بیفته، ولی الان بحث سیستم نیست دوستان. دارن اینجا صحبت میکنن توی نوفدی که زمان حساسیه. شما با بحث سیستم کردن چه ارزش افزوده ای رو ارائه میدی؟ از خودت بپرس آقای سینا، از خودت بپرس. میدونی چی میگن الان؟ مثلا به جای اینکه انرژی اینجا بذاری مطرح نکنین دیگه. ببخش این کیه؟
من بحثم در رابطه با محتوا بود، چون فرق نمیکنه که تا که یک دولت در تبعید باشه، یه حکومت در تبعید میتونه پادشاهی باشه، میتونه جمهوری باشه، میتونه خلیفه باشه، هر چیزی میتونه باشه. ولی باید چیه؟ یه استراکچری رو بیا چیکار کنه، معرفی کنه،
خب
بگه
الان
که
معرفی کرده دیگه، دفترچه معرفی کرد، خوندی شما دفترچه رو؟ حالا اگه میخواین یه روزی در مورد فقط قسمت سیاسیش بخونیم، میدونی من حالا شما بیا به من بگو که من فکر میکنم کافیه. آیا آیا مثلا بهترینه؟ نه، منم موافقم، ولی من فکر میکنم کافیه. اون تصویره که توی ذهنمون هست که این باید چجوری اتفاق بیفته، ما فکر میکنم به هممون یه لول ست لازم داریم. شاید مثلا من فکر میکنم ما باید با کادیلاکی که ریماش همه طلای به وارد ایران بشم، شما فکر میکنین نه بعد با دوچرخه بریم، اون یکی فکر میکنه نه مثلا من میخوام با این بنز که مثلا کوپه وارد بشم. آقا تصویرامون یکی نیست، هممون در اصل میخوایم وارد ایران بشیم ولی تصویرایی که داریم از این که اون اینو من فکر میکنم یه لول ست بکنیم. دفترچه به نظر من
خب ببینید، من
حالا
میدونی منظورم چیه. قبول دارم که یک مجموعه ای رو اینها راجبش صحبت کرده و مشخص کرده، ولی من فکر میکنم در رابطه با مردم ما الان دنبالی اسم ها میگردن، میخوان ببینن که آقا پس فردا نخست وزیر کی میشه، اون کیه.
اوکی صبر کنیم مثل جلوانی همینجا، الان همینجا به نظر شما، خب به نظر شما الان که ما بالاخره شما تجربه دارید دیگه، خب منم دارم دیگه، به نظر شما اسم مهمه یا عمل کرد و محتوا؟ صبر کنید آیا ما میتونیم دسترسی داشته باشیم به عمل کرد؟ خب سابقه سیاسی افراد تا این مقدار هست دیگه، درسته؟ آیا اسم این که کی خواهد بود مهمه یا اینکه میدونید اون کشتیه اون کیه که اون چیزشو میچرخونه، اسمش فارسی کاپیتانشه؟ نه کاپیتان بهش میگن؟ نه بگید شما. کشتیبان بهش نمیگن. ناخدا او مای گاد، ببخشید. ای خدا عجب، گفتم ناخدا، ای خدا جالب شدم، بعد شاعر میشدم. ببخشید. نه، این ناخدا رو که ما بهش اعتماد داریم به دلایل درست. حالا حداقل من برای خودم صحبت میکنم. خب ببینید ایشون که هستن، درسته، محتوای چارچوبی رو هم ارائه دادن، یعنی اینکه ما در چه محتوایی داریم کار میکنیم، تمامیت ارضی و فلان، سلکولاریسم و دموکراسی و حقوق بشر. خب افراد مثلا فرض کن مثلا آقای میگم مثلا دارم میگم آقای جلوانی قرار بشه وزیر. دوستان من این رو میخوام یه اسم بیارم که همتون میدونید من در مورد این بسیار ناراحتم، ولی میخوام یه چیزی رو outside box بگم. آره حالا آره دقیقا همینطوره. موضوع اینجاست که میخوام یه چیز، فقط میخوام یه چیزی میگم. شما میدونید که من با دسته فحاشا مشکل دارم، صبر کنید یه لحظه. اما اگر شاه من بیاد یکی، من میبرمشون دادگاه اونوری، اون این کار منه، ولی اگه شاه من، رهبر انقلاب ملی من بیاد بگه این آقای مثلا کسک مثلا بشه، چه میدونم یه کسی بشه، من دهانم باز نمیشه. نه به خاطر اینکه کورانه میخوام فرمان گوش بدم، به هیچ عنوان. شما بنده رو یه زنی پیدا کردید تو این مدت که من شناختیم کسی باشم که کورانه؟ نه، من فکر میکنم باید خیلی پرکتیکال باید اینجا عمل کنیم، خیلی عملگرایانه. شما اگر در مورد افراد مسائل شکایت شخصی دارید، شکایت عمومی دارید، نظریاتشون براتون مشکله، تا زمانی که عجلت شخصی ها، تا زمانی که محتوا میتونه درست باشه، من اوکیه، من صورتم میکنم اون بر. با این همه که شما همتون میدونید من در این مسئله شخصیه برام میخوام، یعنی دارم اینو واسه چی میگم؟ اینو واسه که دوستان گفتم پریروز و داشت میگفت اگه فلان کسک باشه، گفتم تو که منو میشناسی، من اگه بخوام بگم اگه فلان کسک، میدونم اون فلان کسکی که من چیز نیستم، اصلا توی باغ این مسائل نیستا، میگم ولی فرض محال که محال نیست که اگر حتی اونم باشه، من رو میکنم اونور. دوست ندارم ببینم طرفو، رو میکنم اونور. ماها آدم بزرگیم. الان شما میگی مثلا بیاد بگه طرف کیه؟ خب مثلا الان طرف مشغولیه با 2 تا PhD خیلی خوب و سابقه بسیارم کارهای عملی هم کرده، ولی شاید آقای جلوانی و بنده ایرانی هم هست، فارسی هم حرف میزنه، فرهنگ منم خوب بلده، چی میدونم، و الان مثلا رو میگم، مثلا وزیر راه و ترابریه، مثلا دارم میگم آیا مهمه که بریم خیلی زیر و روش در بیاریم؟ به نظر من در این شرایط این کافیه جناب جلوانی. و وقتی که ما مملکت رو که داریم پس میگیریم بسیار هوشمندانه بعد ما یه پروسه‌ای داشته باشیم واسه اینکه مردم بتونن فیدبک بدن. ملتفت میشید منظورمو؟ من فکر میکنم که رضاشاه دوم در جریان فراهم کردن یه چنین تیمی هستن. بنده هیچ اطلاعی ندارم، ولی این فکر رو میکنم بنا به گفته‌های خودشون در اون حماسه مونیخ 2 که یک چنین چیزی رو ما باید ببینیم که داره میاد. جریان بسیار جریان حساسیه، چون که دشمن ما خیلی شیادانه همش میخواد چوب لاچرخ ما بکنه و من فکر میکنم ما باید خیلی سعی کنیم که وسیله دشمنه نشیم، خواسته و ناخواسته. میدونم بچه‌ها میگن آزادی بیان نیست، ما میخوایم حرف خودمون بزنیم. اوکی فیر ایناف، حرف خودتون رو تا آخر زندگیتون بزنید. ولی نلسون ماندلا میگه اگر نظر شما، خب اگر نقد هیچ ایرادی نداره، ولی اگه نقد شما در تخریب اتحاد اتفاق بیفته نابخشودنیه. افراد میگن او اتحاد داشت توی جورج تاون به وجود میامد. آقا جان ولمون کنید، آقا این اصلا از جهت علمی اصلا صحبت کردنی نیست. اگه اون افراد نبودن شما واقعا فکر میکنید اون سیستم ادامه پیدا میکرد؟
Ladies and gentlemen.
الان اینا برگشتن یه 2 دقیقه دیگه شروع میکنن. نه، اگر اون
اتفاقا
افراد نمی آمدن وسط داد و بیداد کنن سیستم ادامه پیدا نمی کرد، چون که از جهت تفکر اسرائیلی اونها ضد اسرائیل هستن. تمام. آیا مثلا خیلی زود ما جلوی همه خطرها رو گرفتیم؟ نه، من نمیتونم بگم اگر این کارو نمیکردیم چه اتفاقی میافتاد، چون که این اگره اصلا کلا هایپوتزیسش اشتباهه. درنچه به خاطر اون افراد میان میگن آخ نه این اتحاد فلان خرابه. نه آقا جان ولمون کنید. یه ذره ما که احمقیم، مگه کوریم، مگه نمیفهمیم، مگه حواسمون نیست، مگه افراد برید بخونید آگاهی کسب کنید. این نگرانی ها اوکیه، ولی افراد باید یاد بگیرن مدیریت کنن نگرانی هاشونو. من اینطوری فکر میکنم. ببخشید.
خانم الهام،
بله.
اتفاقا اون جورج تام به نظر من خیلی واقعا خیلی پیچیده و با معماری سیاسی بود، خیلی جالب بود به نظر من.
بله من حالا میگم افراد نظراتشون متفاوته و دتس اوکی، ملتفتیم. و ولی موضوع اینجاست که ما باید گفتم نلسون ماندلا چی گفت؟ اتحاد رو تخریب بکنه اون نابخشودنیه. نابخشودنی میدونی یعنی چی؟ یعنی ببخشید دوست میخوام معذرت میخوام، یعنی خائنم نابخشودنیه. من نمیخوام خدای نکرده بگم کسی خائنه، ولی کامان یعنی you have to raise above pity. یعنی چجوری میگن که بس دیگه این مسئله. ببینید آخه من الان کنفرانس شروع میشه، دوستان نیفتیم توی پترنی که جمهوری اسلامی برای ما میسازه. ما توی آمریکا به این میگیم جاب سکیوریتی. میدونی چیکار میکنه کسی که میاد جاده رو درست میکنه؟ به قول این همکارای قبلی میگفتن انگار توی زمین اون گوشه‌شو سوراخ میکنه، بعد از یه دونه زمستون دوباره از اول بعد به جاده رو درست کنه. یعنی به عبارتی برای خودش جاب سکیوریتی درست میکنه که هی برگرده، هی بعد زنگ بزنیم میگم آقای مثلا فلان بیا این جاده رو درست کنید دیگه. میدونید یعنی جاب سکیوریتی یعنی برای کار خودش امنیت ایجاد میکنه که هی بهش بگیم بیا ما نیاز داریم به تو. جمهوری اسلامی روشمندیش اینطوری از ما هویت ها رو واژه ها رو گرفته، اومده به ما یک فیک اتحاد رو که من فکر می‌کنم رضا شاه دوم آگاهی داشتن. ببین حرکت هایی که انجام دادن به عنوان اینکه با اینها نیستن نمادیه، از سر میز بلند شده، یعنی بسیار نمادی بود، در یک جمع بود و همونجا معلوم شد که ما همه وایسان گفتن ایوا چه خبر چی شد و سخت بود برای ما فهمیدنش، ولی مسئله کامپلکسه و ایشون اینطوری توجه ملت رو گرفت و من فکر میکنم اتفاقا یک مسئله بسیار کامپلکس و فنومنال بود از طریق خودش. اینهایی که هم فکر میکنن ما اگه نبودیم الان معلوم نیست انقلاب هیچ رفته، هیچ جام نمیرفت آقا. انقلاب هیچ جا نمیرفت اگر اینام نبودیم، همون پروسه ادامه پیدا میکرد. چرا؟ چون که ضد اسرائیل توی بکبون ایناست. اون هماهنگی اون جمع نمیتونست ضد اسرائیل باشه و رضا شاه دوم تفکرش ضد اسرائیلی نداره توش. ببخشید اون جمع ضد اسرائیل بود، نمیتونست که طرفدار یا بی تفاوت باشه به اسرائیل. ملتفتین؟ درنچه اصلا میافتاد. اصلا اون میخوام یعنی بگم که اینقدر گیر ندین که من میدونم که من نباشم الان من میدونم این درست نمیشه یا اینکه من میدونم چجوری درست بشه. بس دیگه اوکی. بشینید مقاله بنویسید برای اون چیزایی که میدونید، ولی با وقیح نباشه، با مثلا نمیدونم والا این رفتارا درست نیست. نمیخوام الان دیگه خیلی فکر میکنم منفی گفتم، شروع شده، من دوباره بقیه‌اشو میذارم. خیلی کنفرانس خوبیه به نظر من. خیلی توجه کنید به نکاتی که بسیار حساس داره گفته میشه. من پخش میکنم.
خانم الهام یه چیز بگم اجازه هست؟
داره پخش میشه، بفهم.
Seats. The pro.
بفهم.
ببینید مثلا تو کوچه بازار ایران که برین، اگه یادتون باشه، بعد میان نگاه میکنن میبینن مردم عادی ها، میگن مردم عادی که همشون هم نور چشمن، ولی این که نمیاد ببینه که این آقای قاسم سعید قاسمی نژاد در چه سطحی عالی داره صحبت میکنه و چقدر میدونه که این اصلا خیلی صحبت ایشون نمیتونه بگیره، افراد عادی نمیتونن بگیره. ولی تا که میاد میشنوه آقا سعید اومده، آقا سعید چی بوده، مثلا خانوادش تو ایران بودن، فلان بودن، خودش رفته دکترا گرفته و این یه کسی درباره این چیزاش صحبت میکنه، درباره حرفاش که نمیاد حرف بزنه، که این میاد که درباره سیستمی میخواد چیکار بکنه، یک معمار ملی بشه که اصلا لغت معمار
اوکی
ملی نمیفهمه. ملاحظه
اوکی، من
بکنید.
ملتفتم. ببین من میگم که این رو من شما اکس وای با افرادی که صحبت میکنیم، این ما بتونیم کمک کنیم به افراد یه اسپکت دیگه، یک زاویه دیگه ای از تفکر رو بگیم که آقا به اسم و ایناش یه مقدار کمتر کار داشته باش، یه ذره به این آقای میخوای بپردازی، به عمل کردش نگاه کن. ببین شما میگی علاقه من نیست، اوکی منم موافقم، ولی روز اول علاقه‌مند نیست. بعد از اینکه 20 بار بهش بگین علاقه‌مند میشه. شاید بعد از 40 بار بگین دیگه میگه من دیگه با تو میدون ملتفت میشیم. منظورم مگه ما بعد بسازیم دیگه، ما میخوایم فرهنگ بسازیم، ارتباط داشتن بسازیم، بریم جلو. این قسمتی از اونه. شما من با شما موافقم، آره داخل ایران مثلا میگه فک و فامیل. آیا این درسته به نظر شما؟ من فکر نمی‌کنم. محتوا مهمه.
برای شما یه روشن فکر، برای شما یه تحصیل کرده محتوا، برای مردمی عادی دنبالی همین اسم هستن، استریوتایپ هم شما که قبول
بله
دارین دیگه،
ملتفتم این رو، ولی
استریوتایپ.
میگم ما میتونیم اون استریوتایپ باشه، ما اگر بتونیم روشی ارائه بدیم. من اینطوری فکر میکنم، من اگه ما بتونیم روشی ارائه بدیم که مدام نیفتیم توی اون چاله های این که به اون استریوتایپ برسه، به محتوا، مدام به محتوا اشاره بشه، باور کنین خیلی سخت نیست روشمندیش، مدام به محتوا اشاره بشه. تمام شد.
خب ببین مثلا من بعضی هستن که میگن که خودشون منتسب به شاهزاده، نه بعضی فیگوراشون رو نگاه میکنی میبینی واقعا با سوادن. من خودم تا اینو نگاه میکنم دلم گرم میشه، میگم که خب اطراف شاهزاده ببین چه کسایی هستن، چه مشاورایی داره، اینها خوبه. این فیگورا حتی که دائمی هم نیستن، بیان چیز بشن، بیان خودشونو نشون بدن، مردم دلگرم میشن، میگن اینا کیه. ولی یه افرادی که بیان فقط برنامه هارم بگن، بازم میدونی یه حالتی چیز داره، چه بگم، نمیتونه ارگانایزد باشه، یک سیستم فکری ایجاد بکنه، یه و برای من باید قوت قلبی باشه. من احساسم اینه، شاید من اشتباه بکنم.
حالا میگم بهتون دیگه، یعنی شما میگه مثلا چهرهایی که آشنا هستن در اون کنار، من میگم به شما حتما من فکر میکنم که بعد ملت ایران حالا این یه بحث دیگه ایه، بذارید ما الان اینو گوش بدیم. این تاپیک خیلی خوبیه اتفاقا. من فکر میکنم که ببین ما اگر در این مورد صحبت کنیم لول ست میشیم، ولی من دوست دارم که وقتی که صحبت میکنیم دیگه مثلا اگری تو دیسگری کنیم، بریم جلو. هی دوباره مثلا نیاد دوباره برگرده طرف بگه این اینطوری بود، این که انرژی که آخه چجوری مثلا، یعنی ما چقدر انرژی داریم، ملتفت میشیم منظورم مسرجی. ولی تاپیک خیلی خوبی رو آوردیم بالا و من واقعا خودم دوست دارم که اصلا روی این قسمت کار کنیم، ببینیم نباید سخت باشه اینقدر. مشکل زیستی ما هستش که این کار رو یه مقدار برای ما سخت میکنه، وگرنه نباید اینقدر سخت باشه. به هر صورت حالا اینو بزنیم بعد از این کنفرانس ما صحبت کنیم در موردش. ببخشید بزنیم
Program is about to begin.
صدا میاد؟
Can you hear me?
اگه صدا میاد
This isn't even the thing.
That's how I budget something. That's how I was taught.
Sorry, where's Josh? Oh, there he is. I lost the coffee that you got me.
دوستان صدا هست؟
Yes, just so I can save it. Ladies and gentlemen, please take. The program is about to begin. Regime chose to the whole region. Video from inside Venezuela. Welcome back. We now have a message of solidarity and support from Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. Maria Machado sent us this video from inside Venezuela, where she is leading the fight against the Maduro regime. I want to thank the National Union for Democracy in Iran, and especially Prince Reza Pahlavi, for the opportunity to participate in the Iran Conference 2025. It is an honor to address you during such crucial moments, not only for Venezuela, but for the whole region, Latin America, and for all those around the world who believe in freedom and democracy. We Venezuelans are forging our path to freedom and civility. It has been 26 years of struggle against a criminal regime that today shows its worst face. On July 28, 2024, millions of Venezuela gave a monumental example of commitment and courage, electing Edmundo González Urrutia as the president-elect of Venezuela. We proved our victory like never before, placing the original tally sheets of truth before the eyes of the whole world. Yet Maduro's criminal regime chose to steal the election and unleashed a fierce persecution that continues to this day. But the resistance of our people who have already decided to be free has not ceased either. On the contrary, it has grown, and we will continue to fight until we free ourselves and all those currently held hostage by this criminal tyranny. We know this is not an easy task and that it requires enormous sacrifice. If there's one thing authoritarian and criminal regimes understand, it is how to cooperate with one another to cling to power. They use every tool at their disposal: resources, propaganda, technology, weapons, and fear. But if there's one thing we have also shown, both inside and abroad Venezuela, it is that all those things can be overcome with organization, with strategy, intelligence, and passion. We know that the Iranian and Venezuelan regimes collaborate closely with each other, and they have become a real threat to our hemisphere. Their increasing military presence and the exchange of dangerous technologies, no more evident now than any other moment, have put all of us at risk. That is why they must be defeated. The regimes in Caracas and Tehran must understand that the world will no longer tolerate their actions and that nothing can stop the people who have already chosen to be free. That is why those of us who share a common cause for freedom must also unite. Just as the evil join forces to sustain themselves, those on the side of justice and freedom must organize and coordinate even better. Our duty, therefore, is to dismantle the criminal structure that holds power in Venezuela with the support of autocracies like the regime in Iran. This structure is upheld by a minority rejected by the overwhelming majority of Venezuelans.
And finally, even within the regime, growing fractures are becoming evident. I am convinced that the liberation of Venezuela will have global repercussions and will serve as a catalyst for other societies like the brave people of Iran. Ours is a shared task, and we will prevail. Venezuela will be free. Iran will be free. Thank you very much.
Together, the Islamic Republic and the regime in Venezuela are fighting a war of oppression against their own people and a war against the United States. The people of Iran and the people of Venezuela both deserve better, and when these regimes are gone, America can again have allies. For decades, people in Iran and Venezuela have been fighting for liberation and justice and against petrostates that are corrupt to the bone. To maintain their grip on power, the two oppressive regimes need to stay in a permanent state of war with the free world and the United States. But one thing is for certain. These two proud nations will soon be free, and the world will have two staunch allies in South America and the Middle East. Our next panel, Regime Change, When, Not If, will discuss why the regime now stands uniquely exposed, who inside and outside Iran holds the levers to push it over the edge, and how an organized transition can turn sudden collapse into a durable democracy. Please join me in welcoming panelists Lisa Daftari, editor at the Foreign Desk, Mark Dubowitz, CEO at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and Carrie Filippetti, Executive Director at the Vandenberg Coalition. This panel will be moderated by Newfdie Vice President Cameron Khonserinia.
Well, thank you again to all of you for being with us. Thank you to our distinguished panelists. I want to say at the very beginning of our panel, you heard the news this morning at the start of this conference about the strikes in Qatar. It was the last Newfdie conference that many of you recall at the very end that Hassan Nasrallah was eliminated. It is this Iran conference that it seems some leaders of Hamas were eliminated. So we're getting closer and closer, and we're going to have actually now a weekly Iran conference so that we can have... So I hope you all don't get tired of these hotel ballrooms because we'll be coming back. First, before we begin, allow me to recognize and thank Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi for being here today. It's rare to see keynote speakers come and listen to other panelists and an entire conference. So we very much appreciate that, sir, and your kind attendance today. It means an immense amount to all of us. On stage, many of you in this room are familiar with our panelists. Lisa, Carrie, Mark are no strangers to the people of Iran. All of you have been speakers at past Iran conferences, so we're very glad to have all of you back. Thank you so much. Your support of this conference means an immense amount to us. And just allow me to say at the beginning that I think the people of Iran have few friends like the three of you in the media, in Washington think tanks, and on behalf of many Iranians, some of whom probably write to you and you hear, I just want to thank you because the solidarity that you show, the honesty that you bring to your work is something that we're seeing more and more of in Washington, but the three of you were certainly at the vanguard of it for a long time. So thank you for all that you've done and you continue to do, and thanks for being here today. And I will now stop talking and hear from all of you. We're going to talk about the dirty word or the dirty phrase of regime change. Maybe after dinner table conversations about religion and sex, this is the third thing you're really not supposed to talk about. But we're going to talk about it. And I want to hear from each of you at the very beginning. Where are we? We've called this panel Regime Change When, Not If. Is that the right title for this panel? Do you see us getting there? What's your current status update? And Lisa, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Cameron. I think, in terms of speaking about regime change, we all know how here in the United States, the administration has had very bad experiences with regime change. They haven't done it right. And obviously it's a one-size-fits-all solution. So it's not talked about with regards to Iran. They don't even want to come close to it. No matter how much we try to present facts that the Iran situation is quite different and quite unique. But I want to kind of shift the conversation. When we talk about regime change, we always talk about it from how ready is the United States? How ready are the European nations? How has the mullah regime in Iran, how have they evolved over the last 4.5 decades to meet this goal of regime change? But you seldom hear the conversation about how the people of Iran have evolved for 46 years to rise to the occasion and to rise to the challenge of regime change. And that's something that I actually have had, I've been privy to that evolution in my work. When I first started, when I would write about sanctions being a great tool to diminish the regime and its tentacles, Iranians themselves would get very angry and say, you're vatan furush, you're a sellout, because how can you want sanctions against your own people, against the economy of Iran, no matter how much we would try to talk about sanctions that have to be targeted and enforced on the sectors that pertain to the regime itself. But then we saw in 2009 the people, and obviously so much happened between 79 and 2009, but I want to quickly jump to that moment where, yes, it perhaps started out as, just being disenchanted over a stolen election, but all of a sudden you hear brave Iranians say, Mag bar Khamenei, wow, that felt really good, death to the dictator. Let's go with that now. And really all of this disenchantments came to the point of finding the courage to go out with that and to really get the country back, the country that their parents lost. And that's where you see that generation rise to the occasion. They had a coming of age. And we see this throughout all the different protests, whether they were for the bazaar, for the teachers, for the retirees, and you come all the way to Women Life Freedom, which was another global moment for the protesters of Iran. So it brings us to this moment, and that was your question. I think this is as ripe of a moment as we have ever had in terms of the coming of age, the people being ready, the fact that they're willing to sacrifice so much to gain something so much more.
Thank you, Lisa. Carrie, how about you? How do you see things?
So I'll answer that in two ways. The first is looking at the sources of power that the regime has and its sources of power projection. China and Russia, their supposed friends, did almost nothing after the strikes on Iran's nuclear program. So that demonstrates that their support from other American adversaries has dwindled. Another source of their power projection is their nuclear program, their ballistic missile program, their oil program. All of this over the course of both U.S. and international sanctions, as well as activity by the United States and by Israel, have been dismantled and in some cases destroyed. The other source of their power is, of course, the repressive apparatus, which is why they have been leaning so heavily into that repressive apparatus, forcing people into the streets in massive numbers. And I would just say that, when I think about the question of regime change in Iran, I think back to one of the sort of original sponsors of regime change, Thomas Jefferson. who said that experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. And as we're seeing with the increase in repression, the 20,000 arrests since June, the nearly 1,000 political prisoners that have been murdered, what we are seeing is that the evils are no longer sufferable. And that is why, when I think about how this regime comes to an end, it is that simple equation. The evils are no longer sufferable for the Iranian people, and therefore the regime will change.
Thank you.
Good luck following that, Mark.
Yeah, good luck with that. First of all, Cameron, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you. And it's wonderful to be at Nufdie again, the authentic voice of Iranian Americans. I want to congratulate you on eliminating that regime echo chamber that used to exist in this country and in this city. So well done on that. And also Your Highness, a great pleasure to be with you again. I think the voice of the Crown Prince has been the most eloquent voice out there, really articulating why regime change is not only possible but is likely. And Kerry's quoting Thomas Jefferson. I'm going to quote another great American president, President Ronald Reagan, who came into office in 1981, and he made it very clear that the Soviet Union was going to end up on the ash heap of history, that it was inevitable that would take place. And instead of just talking about it, he actually implemented a strategy of maximum pressure on the Soviet regime and maximum support for anti-Soviet dissidents behind the Iron Curtain. And I remember it was 1989, and I was a student of Soviet studies at McGill University in Montreal. I'm originally from Canada. And one morning, our professor came in, and she said, everybody please stand up, take your textbooks, come to the front of the room and throw them in that garbage can. Now remember, this is before recycling bins, but also before the internet, before smartphones. So we had no idea what was going on, and we had just paid $70 for that Soviet studies textbook. So we weren't very happy about throwing it in the garbage can. What we did, we sat back down and said, Professor, what's going on? And she said, the Berlin Wall just came down. Everything in that textbook was wrong. Right? The Soviet Union was supposed to survive for 1,000 years. It's gone down as a result of President Reagan's maximum pressure, maximum support strategy. So for those of us who are old enough to remember President Reagan and the Cold War, I think we are now in the equivalent of the 1980s, but now there's another brutal repressive regime that I believe is going down as a result of maximum pressure on the regime and the necessity of maximum support for the Iranian people. So if you want to hear more about regime change, this is very self-promotional, but I've got a podcast called The Iran Breakdown. We've done 2 seasons on regime change in Iran. We're honored to have His Highness Reza Pahlavi as our first guest on our inaugural episode. And we talk a lot about, Cameron, what is it going to take? Because I don't think it's just a question of if anymore. It's really now a question of when, and I believe there will be a Nufdie conference in our lifetime in a free Tehran.
Not if, but when that conference happens, please know that the 3 of you are certainly invited, and we look forward to having you there as well. I'm going to stick with you, Mark, on this same topic. I'm going to come back to a few of the things that each of you said. One of the important components of change, potentially in Iran, and you alluded to it, is maximum support. We've talked a bit about it today. FDD, as everyone knows, has been really at the forefront of pressuring bad guys all over the world. The Chinese Communist Party, Putin's regime in Russia, the Islamic Republic in Iran. One of the clearest examples, at least in conventional wisdom, of pressure are sanctions, and we've just had news about snapback. For a lot of people, I think it's difficult to break down. Is it going to happen? Is it a process? Will it still be impactful? Can you give us your perspective on the importance or the role that sanctions play, and specifically snapback? Is this actually going to have a significant impact? Tell us your thoughts.
So I'm going to be very undiplomatic. I hope actually they're members of the E3 sitting in the audience from Germany, France, and UK. I think you've shown that you're really spineless when it comes to actually confronting the Islamic Republic of Iran over the years. I mean, you had the audacity at one point to bar His Highness from the Munich conference in Germany, and over the decades to declare him PNG, while you allowed the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Revolutionary Guards, the Ministry of Intelligence to use their embassies in your cities to conduct not only surveillance but terror attacks where they murdered Iranian dissidents. So am I optimistic, Cameron, that there will be snapback? I'm hopeful, but I never underestimate the willingness of the Europeans to cower and kowtow and ultimately concede to the games of the Islamic Republic. Now, if they don't, and we've got about 19 days left to find out, then snapback is coming, and it is critical because it reestablishes zero enrichment as the international standard. That means no enrichment, full dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program, and thankfully the United States and Israel have made that much easier as a goal. Second is it reimposes the arms embargo and the missile embargo on the Islamic Republic and its partners, which means it'll now be against international law to provide the regime with those deadly missiles and the deadly conventional weapons that it turns on its neighbors and the weapons on its people. And so China and Russia, as Kerry said, even though they don't tend to comply with international law, will be in violation of it. I think that's very important. And then there's a whole slew of international economic sanctions that will come back. The rial is already trading at 1,000,000 to 1. I think many of you remember on the eve of the Islamic Republic, it was 70 to 1. So it just goes to show you what an economic disaster this regime has been beyond a political, social, and environmental disaster. So it's coming. I hope we'll see it actually reach its conclusion. Again, I've been around this town and been involved in this for too many years to have full confidence in the Europeans, but maybe they'll surprise me.
Kerry, on the other side of maximum pressure is maximum support. And it's, I think, very timely to have our panel just after the message from Maria Corina Machado, because one of the things that you did before forming the Vanderbilt Coalition was work in the State Department on Western Hemisphere issues and on dictatorships in our part of the world, in Cuba and Venezuela. So you have experience beyond just the Iran context. So aside from pressure, which we can come back to on the support side, what can be done, what has been done in the past from the U.S. government's perspective, from other actors to engage with an alternative, with forms of an alternative, to convene opponents of the regime? I think most of us would agree we don't want foreign powers to be in the position of picking winners or losers or anointing people. But you've seen this in the Iran case, in other cases. What can and should the U.S. government and partners do?
Yeah, and I think it was so wonderful to see Maria Corina up there. She's just a fearless champion for all that is good in the world and for obviously fighting the Maduro regime. It's really funny because I was listening to some of the earlier panels and all of the discussions about, the opposition in Iran and how to get it united. And these are things that people spoke about all the time in the Venezuela context. And then Maria, and everybody was saying it wasn't unified. And then Maria Corina Machado won over 90% of the vote, 90%. If that's not unity, then I don't know what is. So it's very common for DC to talk about opposition unity, opposition unity. Well, I'm sorry, those in glassed houses shouldn't throw stones. It took us 15 votes to elect the Speaker of the House, and that wasn't that long ago. So unity is I think, this overblown thing. There's going to be a lot of different players, and the ones that there will be ones that rise to different roles within a transition. So I think what is critical is that it all is decided by the people of Iran, that it is not something that comes from the outside, from the U.S. or elsewhere. So a few things that I think have been really important. Number one is to understand that maximum pressure is a key part of maximum support. These are two sort of threads of sort of like a DNA helix, right? Like they are intimately linked together. We need to continue to implement sanctions. We need to continue to attack those sources of the regime's political power projection. We do also need to do a lot more in terms of enabling the opposition to coordinate amongst themselves and to get their messages out to other players like the United States. So this is things like advancing internet access, VPNs, helping to take some of the funds that we have frozen from the Iranian regime and redirect them towards things like strike funds and other things that can help support the people of Iran. There's a lot of things within that soft power context that I will say there's a lot more that the U.S. government can do to assess that, to make sure that we're opening up broadcasting and so on so that the people of Iran can communicate with each other and hear the messages coming from the United States and their other allies and partners. Because it is critical, you know, they say hope is not a strategy, sure, but hope is a really powerful tool. And if they understand how much support they have from the international community, from the United States, that will make a huge difference as well, helping to mobilize them despite how difficult and how scary it is to do that. So that means that we also need to make it incredibly clear what our objectives are. Our objectives are not to deal with a murderous regime. Our objectives are not to negotiate anymore. The Islamic Republic of Iran has shown what it is for nearly 50 years. Our objective is to free Iran, period, full stop. And that's a message that needs to come directly from the President of the United States, directly from members of Congress. So those are a few things that we can do to help demonstrate our commitment and to make sure that we're not picking winners. We're just investing deeply in all of the people of Iran as they're fighting against this regime and making sure we're supplementing that support with continued pressure against the regime itself.
Lisa, you've talked...
And actually, I'll add one more thing that I think is important because our president cares a lot about what his supporters think. And my organization, the Vandenberg Coalition, held a poll in July where we asked, is it in the U.S. national interest to support pro-American dissidents that are fighting against adversarial regimes abroad? And what we saw was that 2/3 of Trump voters said that it was in the U.S. interest, and over 80% of MAGA voters under the age of 45 said that it was an interest. So we're seeing that the trend lines are even higher for young MAGA voters, which are typically seen as the sort of less interested in going abroad. They understand how critical it is to support the Iranian people, to support the Venezuelan people in their efforts to oust their dictatorial leaders.
I want to come back to that poll because the work you guys have done on polling is fantastic. Lisa, you've in fact in the green room we were talking about communication and how to get messaging. I want to give you just a chance to talk both about maximum support, your views on it, what can be most effective from the U.S. perspective, from the U.S. side, and maximum pressure. So please.
Yeah, I think maximum pressure has proven to work. But I want to just, again, pivot very, very quickly because we don't have that much time, but to talk about how those who support this, those of you who are in this room, obviously are committed to a free Iran, regardless of what capacity that may be or what kind of dedication you have to that cause. I think we have to look at a free Iran. It's not going to come because of facts on human rights violations. It's not going to come because the people of Iran are suffering or they're living under repression or that they don't have a free press or that they don't have the internet and they can't get on Facebook. I've been doing this a long time and it's not going to move the needle. But you know what is? When we prove to members of Congress and the president and everyone else who has any sort of skin in this game that it'll be beneficial for the United States to have a free Iran. That means prosperity for the United States. It means prosperity for investors. It means prosperity for venture capitalists. It means free trade with Iran. It means better relations in the Middle East. Cyrus Accords, of course. We saw the Abraham Accords and how successful they were. So in terms of messaging, it's very important to not talk about freeing Iran as a charity case, but to talk about freeing Iran as a position of strength for the United States as well. That's number one. In terms of the maximum pressure in general, I think there also has to be a strategic element to communicating with the people of Iran as well. I know we don't have Voice of America anymore. That was one channel in which we could communicate from Washington, D.C. straight into Iran. Now we rely on social media. And that's not always a great thing, right? Because there are a lot of different voices out there that are saying a lot of different things. And a lot of that is the political warfare that we're seeing come from the mullahs themselves that are hijacking the narrative. Because of that, there has to be more of a strategic communications approach to communicating with the people of Iran. Things are happening behind the scenes. People are championing the idea of a free Iran. And that has to come from Washington. I think it would be wonderful to see President Trump look right into the camera and say, this is what we want for the people of Iran. And not wait for Nowruz every year to do that. Do it more often. Let the people of Iran know that we are in different capacities advocating for them, doing work. There are meetings happening. I will never compliment the PR apparatus in Israel because I think it's very poor and they do a very poor job of messaging. But the one thing I will give them compliments for is the way that they have communicated to the people of Iran that they stand in solidarity. It has gone a very far way to communicate to the people of Iran that there may be bombs overhead, but we're not coming for you. As a matter of fact, we are lighting lights in Tel Aviv for Mahsa Amini. We are doing everything that we can, both publicly and privately. And the people of Iran, for the most part, from what I'm seeing, is that they understand that very well. Now, that same partnership and that same level of support has to come from the United States because Donald Trump won't always be in office, but we have to let the people of Iran know that we have their backs, and hopefully we'll have a free Iran before he leaves office.
Kara, I want to come back to you and the poll that Vanderberg conducted. I mean, the data that you reference is very interesting, I think shocking to most people. How do you think, and coming back to what Lisa said about this not being a charity case in Iran, and I want to pivot this conversation to why this matters for the United States, but how do you communicate the things that the three of you clearly agree on, that this regime is a bad regime, that if it goes, it's good for the United States? How can we most effectively communicate that to American voters that eventually percolates to their congressmen and others? How do we get that message across? You have in this room a lot of activists and dissidents who are spending enormous amount of their personal time out of their pocket, going to Capitol Hill, talking to members of Congress. But what else should they be doing? What messages should they be giving? How do we, clearly people are on the side of this, but how do we make that turn into reality and action?
Yeah, and it's not just talking points. I mean, it has the benefit of being very true, and it has the benefit of having the support of the American people. Again, in this poll, we saw that 92% of Trump voters said that it is critical that Iran not develop a nuclear weapon. So they understand the power projection component of the Islamic Republic. I would just use the same language that Secretary Rubio and President Trump have used many times to describe their objectives for the United States within the term of their administration. And they said that they're committed to making America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. Well, on safer, Iran is this leading state sponsor of terrorism around the world. They've sent billions of dollars to Assad, to the Houthis, to Hamas, to Hezbollah. I don't need to name all of the organizations that they support. And it's not just the security of others, it's the security directly of Americans. We had 241 service members that were murdered in 1983, but it doesn't have to go back that far. In 2024, the Tower 22 attack in Jordan was done by Iranians sponsored proxies. We had 12 Americans that were taken hostage by Hamas and 40 who were murdered in the terrorist attack against Israel, sponsored by the the Islamic Republic of Iran as well. So it is the security directly of Americans that the Islamic Republic puts at risk. Number two, on stronger, well, if we don't have to worry about Iran and the leading state sponsor of terrorism anymore, then that frees up a huge amount of resources for us to be able to deploy in our competition with China, which is the number one adversary. So the best thing that we can do if we want to prioritize the Indo-Pacific is make sure that the Islamic Republic of Iran falls. On more prosperous, the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea have obviously crippled international shipping. They have created exorbitant costs for the consumers as we need to address higher fuel costs, higher insurance costs, as the trip is much longer because they have to go through different routes. So I think this is another example of on stronger and on more prosperous, the benefit to the United States is the end of the Islamic Republic. But it is not only the end of the Islamic Republic, it is also about knowing what can come next. And I think this is a picture that we don't paint often enough. I just think about all the Iranian Americans that I know, and they are some of the smartest, most entrepreneurial, most innovative, most successful, and proudest people that I know. And I think many people in this room fit that description and have family members and friends who also fit this description. A free Iran would be one of the most remarkable partners to Western civilization that we can possibly imagine. They have spent the last 50 years yearning for freedom, sacrificing for freedom, and sacrificing their livelihoods. Just imagining what they would be able to build when they have that freedom is remarkable. And I think that those are the messages that will resonate both with the American people, but also specifically with this particular administration.
I just want to jump in here and say, you know, there's, to your point, Carrie, to paint that picture is so important, and to leave our echo chambers and to paint that picture for people who don't know anything about the situation. So you have the face of the mullahs, then you have the face of Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, a modern man who has the IPP, which is the Iran Prosperity Plan. Did I do that right? Okay. I had the honor of actually interviewing the Crown Prince in front of an audience of, I don't know how many, up to 2,000 people in Los Angeles at a venture capitalist conference. It's called the Upfront Conference. And the reason why it was so even eye-opening for myself is because it was an audience I usually wouldn't have that conversation with, opening up their eyes to just one angle of all of this: the prosperity that could be unleashed with a free Iran. The minds, the innovation, the different industries that would come into play, the money that would come into play, the different investment opportunities that would come into play. And so many people afterwards said it was the best panel of the entire conference. Number one. Number two, it was so eye-opening for them in terms of hearing from the Crown Prince, hearing an actual, viable plan for the future of not just Iran, but how it would trickle throughout the entire Middle East. This is the picture we have to paint, not one of misery and come help us and save us and help the Iranian people, but one of strength and the prosperity that will be unleashed for so many people, both public and private.
Saeed, if you're still here, I think we have to hire Lisa for IPP. On that same point, Mark, one of the things that's said when we discuss this taboo of regime changes, okay, well, you know, these guys go, there's going to be chaos, there's going to be uncertainty, instability. What's your take on that? What's your response to that of after 46 years, a regime that's been in power going? Lisa talks a bit about the Iran Prosperity Project, but you and your fantastic colleagues at FDD, several of whom are speaking throughout the day, have done a lot of work on that. What's your response to those people? I think that's probably the most common critique that all of us get when we talk about this topic, right? Is this regime is going to go, it's going to cause instability in its wake. What's your response to that? And for those who are, again, on the Hill, they're talking to people, what is your recommendation on how we prove that not to be true, or how we respond to that critique?
Well, I think there are a few things in what Carrie and Lisa said. The first is, it's absolutely right. I mean, the only place where Iranians don't succeed is inside the Islamic Republic of Iran. Everywhere they go, they succeed. I grew up in Tehran, and incredibly successful diaspora community, though I would note.
افتادم از اتاق خودم بیرون. ببخشید. دقیقا نمیدونم این اتفاق چجوری اتفاق افتاد، ولی بیاید بذارم.
In the previous panel, it's also crawling with IRGC and their families and Ministry of Intelligence. I think the Canadian government has done a lousy job of keeping the regime out, but it's certainly opened the doors to an extraordinarily successful Iranian diaspora, as it has in the United States and around the world. Second is, look, Iran is not Iraq. It's not Afghanistan. It's not Libya. I mean, Iran, is a millennia-old civilization with incredibly well-educated industrial people who, as we've all three of us have said, when they're given the chance to prosper and succeed, they do. This is not the broken countries of of Saddam's Iraq or Gaddafi's Libya or Assad's Syria. So I think comparing it to those three countries does a disservice to the Iranian people and a disservice to the historical case study. I think the other thing is, I do think, Cameron, that there's really, it's used as an excuse in this town for inaction. I mean, all the time you hear from people in the State Department and the White House and across multiple administrations, and Kerry and Lisa have heard this as well. You know, we would support the Iranian people, but show us an opposition leader inside Iran. And you say, well, if I could show you an opposition leader inside Iran, they'd already be dead. Because then the regime would know them, and you have a serious opposition leader outside of Iran, right? In His Majesty. Listen to him, listen to his voice, listen to what the Iranian people are saying. Stop using this as an excuse for inaction, and it really is an excuse for inaction. And you hear this all the time in not just this administration, but particularly in previous administrations. I want to also pick up on a point that Kerry said from a U.S. strategic perspective. You know, it's about collapsing the Islamic Republic and bringing a free Iran. It's about striking at the weakest member right now of the axis of aggressors of China, Iran, Russia, and North Korea. Right? It's doing what the United States and Israel did in particular in eviscerating the top leadership of the regime, in severely degrading its nuclear and ballistic missile program. I mean, I think the deep embarrassment for Khamenei, right? He always thought the United States could do that kind of damage. He always ridiculed Israel and mocked Israel as the Zionist entity that was incapable of ever taking on the strong and powerful Islamic Republic. Well, in the 12-Day War, which I'm, starting to call twice as successful as the 6-Day War, is something where in 12 days, Khamenei and the IRGC were humiliated, right? They had spent trillions of dollars of Iran's money in direct and indirect costs on building up this nuclear weapons program that the regime never doesn't need, the Iranian people certainly don't need, a ballistic missile program, a drone program, an axis, what they call the axis of resistance. I think it's more like the axis of misery of Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the Houthis and Shiite militias in Iraq. And the Israelis themselves, without U.S. support, have severely degraded that axis. So this is a massive humiliation for the Islamic Republic. It's done significant damage, and it's strengthened U.S. security. It allows us to be able to focus on the Indo-Pacific, where Kerry is right. I mean, I think the greatest threat to the United States remains from the Chinese Communist Party. It's a multi-generational threat, but China is a nuclear-armed, ICBM-armed major superpower. It's going to take us generations to defeat the Communist Party. Vladimir Putin, again, nuclear-armed, ICBMs, massive army, Putin's willing to throw tens and hundreds of thousands of Russians into this meat grinder. It's still a serious country. The North Koreans have ICBMs, nuclear weapons. They could eliminate Seoul in a week. So when you think about the axis of aggressors from a U.S. strategic perspective, the Islamic Republic is the weakest, and therefore with U.S. support, we can bring down the Islamic Republic, and that will redound to the benefit of the United States for decades.
Kerry, on that point, you mentioned earlier in your remarks the fact that the Islamic Republic did not find itself with the active support of Russia and China during the 12-Day War. One of the other things that we commonly hear, from former Fox News TV hosts or other people, that if we were to actively support the people of Iran, if we were to pursue getting rid of this regime, that would cause an all-out war, because Russia would come to the regime's defense, China would come to the regime's defense. You say we didn't see that during the 12-Day War. Tell us a bit more about that, why we didn't see that. What would you have expected to see had those two countries actually been backing this regime? And why is it that you think that Putin and Xi decided, as you say, not to actively engage in defense of the regime during Israel's attack on it?
There's no universe to me in which China and Russia would go to war for the Islamic Republic. There's just that was never in my mind an actual possibility. This was like the same people who were saying that if we struck the Iranian nuclear program, it would start World War III. And instead, no, all it did was decimate a threat that has been plaguing the world for a very long time. And with no Americans killed as a result. So look, China and Russia are interested in their own priorities, and they both have very clear priorities that they have been pursuing for a very long time. China has been playing a long game. They have huge capacities in terms of dominance over most of the supply chains that America needs for our own defense and energy industries. They are not going to compromise their long-term economic and political objectives for the Islamic Republic, which they'll coordinate with because they're all shared in a united vision against Western civilization and Western leadership, but they're not actually friends. They're not actually going to support each other and assist each other in any serious way. So yes, China will continue to provide its technologies for the Islamic Republic to use to spy on its people and identify them and arrest them and so on. But the Chinese Communist Party is not going to put itself in harm's way in order to support and defend the Islamic Republic. And I don't see any country that's willing to do that for the Islamic Republic. By contrast, I see many, many countries, the United States included, who are very willing to put their neck out and fight for and support the people of Iran as they overthrow this regime, because we understand, as Lisa said, that it is in our interest. It is not just better for the world to have a free Iran, it is also better for the United States to have a free Iran.
But before I dig in a bit deeper on that, I just want to allude to one thing that you mentioned in terms of these two countries not coming to the regime's support, not really liking them perhaps all that much. On a previous panel, Ambassador Nathan Sales made the point about how important it is to mock dictators. And I think there was perhaps no better expression of mockery. It wasn't even intended perhaps to be funny or mockery. But in the SCO meeting in China last week, when she gathered, rather after the SCO meeting, when he gathered for the victory over Japan celebrations they had with North Korea and the president of Belarus, Pezeshkian, Khamenei's hand-picked president of the Islamic Republic, was like 6 rows back after translators and staff and butlers and drivers and random pedestrians. Like, he was not even seen anywhere near Xi or Putin, which I think was a remarkable sign of exactly what you're talking about. But paint briefly for us, Carrie, and Lisa and Mark, please add on what it would look like to have a different Iran, particularly in that region, if the Islamic Republic were no longer involved, even if Russia and China aren't all that invested in this regime. When the regime falls and we have a free Iran, one allied with the West, we talk about it a bit in the Iran Prosperity Project, as you alluded to, Lisa, but from an American perspective, from a security perspective, from an Indo-Pacific security perspective, and across the region, what does that look like? If there were a different Iran, tell our audience what that looks like.
Cameron, can I just jump in, and then I'm going to let Carrie and Lisa field that question. I don't want to be too Pollyannish about this. I mean, there's increasing information coming out that the Islamic Republic of Iran is in negotiations with the Chinese Communist Party to rebuild their air defenses, to rebuild their ballistic missile production capability, rebuild their drone capabilities. So while I think everything it said today is correct, I mean, the Chinese communists basically sat out the war. There's no doubt that they are actively engaged in helping Khamenei rebuild his capability. And I'm questioning whether those sales will go through, only because imagine being a salesperson for the Russian S-300, S-400 system right now, trying to convince people around the world that they should buy a Russian air defense system when the Israeli Air Force just eviscerated them in a couple of days. So Xi might be careful. He doesn't want the same humiliation. But, let's also be cautious. I don't think the Chinese and the Russians have abandoned the Islamic Republic, but I do think they're being very cautious about how far they're going to go in helping defend the regime.
Just to illustrate that, and then I'll go into what a free Iran would look like. Any support that the regime has, they're paying for, right? So you look at all the different proxies and how they've been diminished. Hezbollah, if anyone has noticed, in the 12-day war, with the 150,000 missiles that were gifted to them with a big bow from Tehran, did not come to the mullah's aid. That just goes to show you how diminished their tentacles have become. And if they have any remaining relationship with China and Russia, who are equal opportunists on their own, that is something, whether they're buying or selling, it is business only. To answer your question about what a free Iran would look like, it would look like paradise, but I might be out of a job. So it would be wonderful. Look, we have already seen how successful, both in private and public deals, the Abraham Accords has been. If you follow that, and obviously October 7th put a bit of a wrench in that, but it will continue afterwards, because October 7th only worked to underscore the importance of these alliances in the Middle East and how this is the only way forward. It is the only way of thinking of a future of the Middle East where there's stability, there's an end to radicalism, which will come with the end of the regime. And of course, there is this desire to put these tropes of anti-Israel sentiment behind us and to move forward with the idea that we all want to live, coexist with prosperity. Obviously, no one's becoming overnight Zionists, not the Emiratis, not the Saudis, nobody, but they have the desire to get Israeli technology, to get these deals, to get all the benefits that come with having a relationship with Israel. Iran will be no different. Iran will bring this tremendous energy of a population that will be unleashed onto the world and onto the region. I think, as I mentioned in my first set of comments, this momentum that has been created in the Iranian youth population, it can't be stopped. It just can't be stopped, which means the inevitable conclusion is regime change, because they will not back down. They will not change their minds. Reform will not work. Appeasement will not work. Nothing will work to really quiet or quelch the thirst of this generation. So we're going to see so much more, prosperity on every level. There's a lot to talk about, but I think it's just going to be a paradise for the Middle East.
Before we end, Carrie and Mark, to you, from an American security perspective, from a regional perspective, what does it look like when you remove the Islamic Republic, or rather, when these Iranian people have removed the Islamic Republic and it's replaced with a normal Iran? Whether it's similar to what it was prior to 1979, at least with its foreign policy priorities, what does that look like? And why does that matter to America and its allies?
I'll just say one thing. I agree with everything said. The Middle East will continue to be the Middle East. It ain't the Midwest. And one should always be conscious of that. I think there is a rising Islamist power that will fill the vacuum, and that's the Islamist regime of Erdogan's Turkey. That's a big concern for the Arab countries. It'll be a big concern for a free Iran. It's a big concern for Israel. We'll have to tackle the next threat, but certainly having Iran as an ally and as a stabilizing influence, and even more than a stabilizing influence, as sort of unlocking all this potential of prosperity and peace, and countering radical Islam and the Muslim Brotherhood, be an extraordinary ally to have. But let's not kid ourselves. You will be gainfully employed for many years, as all of you will be, because I think the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamist threat from Turkey is the next thing that we need to keep our eye on.
Gary?
Yeah, I would just say I agree with Mark. I think there's a lot of incredible opportunity that would come from a free Iran from an American perspective. First of all, we will not have to worry about the Iranian nuclear program anymore, full stop. Obviously it's been dismantled heavily, but we won't have to worry about that threat. We won't have to worry as much about the Iranian proxy network. They will find other supporters, but it will take a while for them to do so. China and Russia, I think, will be really put on their back legs. So they will continue to be American adversaries. They will find other partners. They may increase their partnership with, as Mark mentioned, Turkey or some other countries. Qatar probably not so much anymore. I think they may be starting to reconsider their position in all of this. But I think fundamentally having another strong ally in the Middle East to partner with us, to partner with Israel, to partner with the Emiratis, to partner with the Saudis, to partner with, if we can transform even just the Middle East for a period, I think it will be to the remarkable benefit of, again, not just America. This is, to me, it is always going back to this issue of this is about Western civilization. This is about what is best for the world, what is best for America, what is best for Iran are all the same thing, which is, a change in leadership and the people of Iran being free.
Well, thank you very much to all three of you for those enlightening remarks. As promised at the beginning of the panel, we're going to have more and more Iran conferences going forward and see what happens at the end of each of them. It's just not going to be at the Four Seasons in Doha, but besides that, we're going to have more and more, and I hope that you'll continue to join us. So join me in thanking Lisa Daftari, Carrie Filippetti, and Mark Dubois.
Thank you to our esteemed panelists. Our next message comes from Dame Priti Patel, Shadow Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs and a Member of Parliament in the United Kingdom.
The regime in Tehran only has itself to blame for triggering of the snapback sanctions process. It has behaved appallingly for too long, and not just over the nuclear issue. It is a prolific state sponsor of terrorism and the root cause of so much suffering in the Middle East. It is fueling Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. It represses its own people with brutal thuggery, and it carries out disgraceful hostile activity on British soil. We have the measure of this regime. And when these tyrants try to destroy the lives of their own people or sow destruction around the world, they need to know they will meet real resistance from Britain and our allies.
Our next panel, A New Middle East, will discuss how the fall of the Islamic Republic and the rise of a democratic Iran would foster peace and prosperity in the region, and what Arab states can do now to hasten that outcome. Please join me in welcoming panelists Patricia Karam, former senior Iran advisor at Freedom House, Johnny Moore, Vice Chancellor at Pepperdine University in DC and Managing Director of Middle East Studies, Heather Neiman, CEO of Lumine Group and former State Department advisor, and Jonathan Saya, research analyst at FDD. This panel will be moderated by Aaron Lobel, founder and president of America Abroad Media. Please join us in welcoming our speakers.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. I'm Aaron Lobel, president of America Abroad Media. Really honored, proud to be involved here, to be associated with Nufti. For me as an American, I think just, be able to support organizations that are supporting the Iranian people is it's a vital national interest of the United States, national security interest. So I'm very proud to be associated with this. Appreciate Nufti inviting me. And we have a distinguished panel, as you all know, and you've got some information about them up there. So I think we'll just get right into it, if we can. But I wanted to make one plug, by the way, sorry, before we begin. That I think will be of interest to this audience. My organization is very proud to be partnering with Iran International on a series of town halls that are enabling policymakers from around the world and the United States to talk directly to the Iranian people. Thursday morning, we have Senator Cotton in the Russell Building at the Senate in a town hall that Iran International will be broadcasting. If anyone is interested in attending, please feel free to let the folks here know, and they will pass your information along to me. That's Thursday morning about 8:30 in the Russell Building. Senator Cotton. Thank you for allowing me to do that plug. Now, to begin with our panel, I think obviously you've heard about the news today. Information is coming out, as we speak. So I just want to check if any of our four would like to comment on what happened in Doha. The topic for our panel is the new Middle East, how a weakened Islamic Republic, how its relationships with its proxies are changing, how the region is changing. So I think it's very relevant, obviously, to our panel. So I just wanted to open it up and see if any of you have any reactions with whatever limited information we have. Let's ask the Reverend first.
I guess the first thing I would say is they probably put the Ayatollah back in the bunker. When the United States says something, it means something. And particularly when this president of the United States says something, it means something. And the president made it very, very clear a few days ago that the United States of America wants the war to end and the terms on which the war should end. And he said it was his final warning. And while the Israelis have been clear that the United States had nothing to do with this, this was an independent operation, it is also quite clear that not a single thing happens in the airspace of the Middle East, particularly in Qatar, that the United States doesn't know exactly what's happening. And so I think it seems to be that for the first time in a long time, we have an administration and a president that speaks the language of the Middle East. And I'm really surprised that people haven't figured that out yet. And so that's my point of view.
Thank you. Anyone else, please? Heather?
Sure. I agree with everything that Johnny said, but I think it's also important to recognize that while this should come as no surprise, I think, the timing, we could argue whether that was surprising or not. I think it was very clear when you look at the pattern of Israel's behavior in the region, certainly since October 7th, that this should not come as a shock. And it was a matter of when, not if, this would happen. The location of Doha, I think, is also not shocking. I don't think there were any indications that Israel would not go forward with an action like this. It didn't have to be in Doha, as it turned out it was. But I do think it's important to keep in mind that the United States and Qatar still do maintain a very close strategic relationship, and Al Udeid is not going to move overnight. So I think it's just important to move forward thinking, in as nuanced terms as we can, and not to view this as a simply black and white action.
Jonathan or Patricia, anything on this and its impact, let's say, on Iran and its relationship with Qatar or Hamas?
Well, just on the Hezbollah angle,
please,
or Lebanon angle, I mean, definitely this is not surprising, but it's an escalation. And so there are some risks of further escalation on the Hezbollah front, which, I mean, one can assess, given the state of Hezbollah right now, which we will discuss in the panel. There is also one aspect which could be interesting. The relationship between Qatar and Hezbollah has been a friendly one, and this could change. It also could affect the dedication of Qatar towards Lebanon, because traditionally it has been a supporter, a big provider of assistance. And so this could lead to Qatar either increasing or decreasing some of that. So all of these are things maybe to watch for.
Thank you. I want to do a little bit of a tour of the region, that's what this panel is about. So, Johnny, you met with President Shara of Syria. There's a spectrum of views that one reads from, on the extremes, a changed man, on the other side, jihadist in a suit. So where do you, having met with him, where do you come out in that spectrum?
You're right, I did meet with him. I spent almost 3 hours with him. I was there, in fact, with Rabbi Abraham Cooper, who was at the conference earlier this morning. He just flew back to Los Angeles. It all began because I was, as I've often done for many years as a private citizen and as a bridge between our country and other countries, someone asked me if I would spend a few minutes with the foreign minister, which I did when he was visiting the UN in the spring last year. I sat down. I invited Rabbi Cooper to join me. We sat down, and the first thing I asked, I told the foreign minister, is I said, this is kind of really simple. Your speech at the United Nations yesterday was nice, fantastic, in fact. I only disagreed with like 2 points. But we're all asking ourselves, can we trust you? And if we choose to trust you, can you even do these things you're saying that you want to do? And his answer was, with your help, we can. And so on the spot, we agreed to go to Damascus. We were there right at the beginning of June. I don't talk about private conversations very much. That's been my habit for many years. But I'll make a couple of observations about Shara. I don't think anybody would have picked Shara as the president of Syria. But when I sat with him, it became quite clear to me what U.S. foreign policy. It makes sense that those of us who sat with this person, it's quite clear that there are ways to work with this person. And I would have three major observations. I'll do them succinctly. Number one, unlike many leaders in the Middle East, he talks about the future. In fact, he most reminded me of my previous meetings with the MBS in this sense. He doesn't talk about the past, he talks about the future. Secondly, he was very pragmatic. It was a very practical conversation about very practical things, regionally, domestically, across the board. All of this was happening in a period of time when it was quite clear Syria was going to devolve into another civil war, or China was moving in, going to become more influential. There's a lot going on. His pragmatism made it clear that we could work with this person. I think there are big questions about how much of the country he actually controlled then, controls now, and what that means for people making rogue decisions and doing things that none of us like. The last thing I would say is it sort of reminded me of conversations almost 10 years ago that what the seed for the regional peace that gave us the Abraham Accords was a security conversation that is no longer just about security. It's about lots of other things, and it's been durable. The new Syrian government, the only government which dislikes the Iranian regime more than the State of Israel and the United States of America, is the new Syrian government. And there is a point of connection here that is surprising, unexpected, and I think as we've seen developments despite real challenges, there are reasons for the U.S. policy. It definitely is a trust but verify, but it is also a all in. If it's possible to make this work, we have to. And I do think on balance that's the right decision, absolutely. And I intend on meeting with them again.
Are there any particular things you think the U.S. should be doing to try to work with the government to make sure to prevent the Islamic Republic from making inroads again?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many of you have been to Syria recently, but nothing works. Okay, nothing works. I mean, there aren't civil servants, the roads, nothing works. Absolutely nothing works. And I do think the new Syrian government needs absolutely everything. And the United States of America or other countries are going to play the primary role in that. And it's a bet, I think it's a bet worth taking. But it's not going to happen through elegant statements and when good things happen or bad. It's going to take the work. It's going to take going into the country, fixing the problems, incentivizing that, having consequences if it doesn't happen, having clear eyes if a Syrian government person, a regime person goes rogue and does something. It's about dealing with the security issues. It's about keeping the back channels alive, all of those things. But I'll just say, I never imagined in my entire life I would have the conversation I was having there about things that we were talking about there. So much so that I was in Jerusalem the next day. And so I think that, but there's no halfway version of this. The U.S. has made the decision to relieve sanctions. I believe it was the right decision. But the U.S. has to be all in on creating a future Syria if it's going to work, and that cannot be taken apart from Lebanon either. It's all integrated together. We have to have two independent countries. Obviously, I'm not suggesting otherwise. We all know what happened there. But we could see peace between the state of Israel and Lebanon and Syria before we see peace between the state of Israel and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, if this is done correctly.
Actually, that's a good segue to Lebanon. Patricia, please feel free if you have a comment, and I was going to ask you about Lebanon.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, one has to recall that also Syria is a deeply fractured country and is dealing with the aftermath of a devastating civil war, which has created a huge amount of humanitarian pain, but also displacement. And, we saw what happened in Sueda, so the challenges ahead, right, are, if I may engage you, are enormous in the sense that and the support that is needed is also in a nation-building project to a certain extent. I don't know if you agree with me.
Yeah, I do agree. And when everything was happening in Sueda, I think like lots of us, I spent the whole weekend trying to get people out and, moving people around and everything. One of the observations I took away from my meetings in Syria at the beginning of June is that the Syrians cannot understand, they cannot comprehend the unique relationship between the Druze community inside of Israel and outside of Israel. They just can't comprehend it. And I think that's where, and no one can deny what happened to the Alawites at the beginning, what happened to the Druze community and happened to some Christians, including 20 evangelicals in Sueda. But in the same way we can't deny that, we have to do what's necessary to make sure that these things don't happen again, and that's complex. And despite all of it, everything seems to still be moving step by step in a direction the United States is mainly controlling.
So Johnny mentioned, of course, the deep connections in Syria and Lebanon. So Patricia, you actually spent 6 weeks there over the summer. I think you just got back recently. So maybe you can give us an update. What's your assessment of the situation, specifically vis-a-vis Hezbollah? How can the United States and others work to prevent the Islamic Republic's rebuilding of Hezbollah? What's the political situation? Over to you.
Yeah, clearly Hezbollah's militarily diminished or visibly diminished. Its arsenal is not in the same condition as it was before, thanks to the operations of Israel against its arsenal, but also its leadership, which we saw, the spectacular sort of operations. And right now, in addition to this, you have tighter surveillance on Syria, which are the supply routes, and Tehran, to a certain extent, has less of a financial bandwidth, which has also helped degrade Hezbollah's resupply lines. And of course, you have this issue of reputational damage to Hezbollah locally from, it being drawn into the regional conflicts that, more Lebanese are viewing as more and more costly and detached. So there is an argument to be made about the weakening of this narrative of resistance, if you will, that's replaced by certain fatigue among people internally. However, that is not to say that Hezbollah doesn't remain a sort of potent actor, because much more than a military actor, it's also a political actor that's deeply entrenched into the political fabric. It has seats in parliament. It has also built, as we know, a parallel sort of service network, clinics, schools, associations, etc. And it also taps into illicit revenue streams from the smuggling of Captagon, fuel, subsidized goods, etc., which cushions it from what the state has experienced, which is a deep financial collapse. And so while Hezbollah might be diminished militarily, it's far from being marginal politically. So right now, you see in the news what's happening. The army has expanded deployments. The US and the Europeans have backed this and have helped it sort of install border monitoring towers, etc., and take a closer look at the smuggling, conditioning additional aid, to enforcement of the resolution that ended the war between Hezbollah and Israel, etc. But, there remains a tug of war inside Lebanon. And if you follow very closely Lebanese politics, you see sort of a bit some of that, which I imagine you don't follow Lebanese politics very closely. But I do think that while support for Lebanon is important, given the extent to which Hezbollah is imbricated in sort of state institutions, there are a number of things that can be done. Of course, anything having to do with the army there needs to be, as there have been, some milestones that are tied to assistance, and a lot of, there's a lot that has been written, so I'm not going to get in too much into it as I see the timer click away. But there's also the tricky business of the Lebanese armed forces getting credibility among the Shia community now that Hezbollah is diminished. And the state has to challenge Hezbollah right now. We are at a juncture where the state has to do it, but the army has to play this role in a way that helps local communities and does gestures of goodwill that establish it as a key stakeholders and helps it gain acceptance. And in general, there needs to be sort of any support to Lebanese institutions need to be insulated. There need to be safeguards that safeguard it from Hezbollah's capture. And again, we can talk about escrow accounts and independent delivery of funds, etc., releasing funds after independent delivery, procurement reforms, etc. But more important, the way to really address an improvement in this is to address corruption, because good governance denies Hezbollah the ability to sort of sneak in. And so it is better to implement measures as anti-corruption with closing loopholes as a byproduct, because the playbook of Hezbollah is to make it appear as if the state is targeting it. And by targeting it, it is targeting the Shia community. So this is something very important to take into account and to keep in mind when sort of dealing with Hezbollah. And I'll stop here in order not to take questions.
And then, how is the mood? Sorry, that was very in-depth and it was very informative, but just, you've been there. Are people feeling there's much more hopeful about the future?
Well, we talked about it a little bit before, and the mood is, there's a general sense of opportunity, generally speaking. This is a moment in time which will not happen again. We have a confluence of factors that have made this such that now the cabinet has stood up and declared that Hezbollah needs to be disarmed. And this is momentous and significant. However, it has to be also tackled with a little bit of sensitivity, because given that reconstruction is not happening immediately and the state is not kind of filling the vacuum that Hezbollah left, there is a danger that Iran reestablish some influence. Already we know, if you read the news today, they've declared Hezbollah that $3 billion in assistance will be applied towards reconstruction in the south. So all of this is dangerous, and really it really underscores the critical importance of the state sort of getting its act together and working with the international community to secure some sort of international assistance that will help it start rebuilding in order to gain the hearts and minds, especially in the south, which has been severely hit.
Thank you. Just continuing our little rapid regional tour here, I guess, Heather, you get to cover the Houthis, which is probably maybe in a difficult region. I don't know, maybe the most difficult problem. Maybe you could give us a sense of where that stands, what you understand of the role of the Islamic Republic to be in terms of supporting this proxy, what you think some of the best solutions could be and how to handle this problem.
Sure. So I think we're actually pretty lucky to be able to talk about the Houthis today because in the wake of the recent Israeli attacks on Houthi leadership, I do think we're entering a new era in containing the Houthis. When I was preparing for this panel, and I think when I was talking to some of the Nufti leadership about this, initially we were framing the Houthi issue as one of primarily financial concern, both in terms of funds and resources flowing from the Islamic Republic to the Houthis, and then also looking at the mechanisms that regional states and Western allies have been using to contain them. In light of the recent, and all of those, I think all of those measures in terms of, increasing shipping patrols, increasing different types of insurance that may be available, and continuing to engage in all of the financial forensics to stop the flow of funds to the Houthis. It's all very important. But in terms of, we're now sort of on the cusp of I think a new strategic era with the recent Israeli attacks. And I think that what we need to do is kind of give that course of action some time to play out. Given the events of this morning, I don't think there's any hesitance on the part of the IDF to continue that type of attack. And I know that there is no love lost in the region about their occurrence. But in terms of sort of getting to a more of a strategic opening, my hope or anticipation is that with some of the changes in leadership on the ground in Yemen, the Houthis will realize that they do not have a winning strategy, and that if they want to negotiate a political future for themselves, they're going to have to do exactly that, which is negotiate and change their tactics. I do think it's a prime opportunity for all of the U.S. partners in the Gulf to take a more front-facing leadership role on the diplomatic front. But fundamentally, there's an amount of work that we can do when it comes to decapitation. But I don't think that this it's not a problem that can be solved through military action alone.
So need for regional coalitions to step up?
I think regional coalitions definitely need to, I would say, refocus on the issue. I don't think that the U.S. is there putting enough resources behind it. Resources are limited, but I do think that once there is greater clarity around the future of Gaza, and I know that sounds like, pie in the sky at this juncture, but I also think given the events of this morning, we're getting to a new phase in the conflict there that hopefully will allow some focus elsewhere. I mean, they're not separate issues, because you do have to keep in mind that there's a fair amount of the Gulf public and that more or less supports what the Houthis are doing, because they see it as an effective way to sort of turn the knife on Israel and at least give the Palestinian people something to hang on to. Obviously, that's not something that we should endorse or that is sustainable, but it is a portion of public opinion that I don't think can be ignored, particularly if we want to sort of reinvigorate regional diplomatic efforts on the issue.
Thank you. Jonathan, now shifting to Iraq. Maybe you could say a little bit about the importance of Iraq, the Islamic Republic's proxy strategy, or what's left of it, and what's the state of the Iran-backed militias, efforts to integrate them into the armed forces, pushback from the regime, the Iranian regime on that. Where does that stand?
Sure. So I think this administration has demonstrated that pressure works in the context of curbing at least Iranian influence to an extent. So we've seen two main examples in recent months. One of them was halting any sanction waiver pertaining to energy, specifically electricity. So, of course, Iran-backed militias have long sought to prevent Iraq from being energy sufficient for itself, although they still are able to export natural gas from Iran. For the most part, I think that really the strategy there should be to ensure that there's no more acts of sabotage from Iran-backed militias. So Iraq, when it comes to the electricity grid, as well as the natural gas reserves, they're able to actually use that internally for their country. The other angle I think was very successful was this administration's pressure prevented Iraq to specifically to further enshrine the PMF into its political landscape, if you will. So, of course, we know to an extent they do receive their funding from the national Iraqi budget, which is in itself a problem. I think the argument for the longest time has been that they're fighting ISIS. That has not been the case in the past few years. So that's another question about U.S. aid towards Iraq. I think we need to really re-strategize to ensure that our aid is more targeted, and specifically it fuels Iraqi national forces, Iraqi counterterrorism forces that are able to carry on these tasks independent from Iranian interference. I think the other way of looking at it is that, of course, Iran tries to exploit, the Islamic Republic tries to exploit Iraq to the best of its ability, usually through the national government, sometimes through the militias, but ultimately the main target continues to be Iraqi national resources. So, for example, they've tried to incorporate their version of the RGC reconstruction company. It's called the Khatam al-Anbiya. They tried to implement the same model in Iraq in the name of the Mohandes company, which is not sanctioned. Again, I don't think necessarily we should be aggressively enforcing sanctions to the extent that it would cripple the Iraqi economy. But Iraq's leadership should know that there are repercussions for colluding with Iranians. Now, of course, that's on the more, I guess, legitimate side of things. When it comes to the illicit activities conducted by these groups, a lot of it has been centered around oil blending to try to either smuggle oil or import from Iran illegally and then blend it and sell it as Iraqi oil. I know Soudani has hinted his openness to counter this, to counter these initiatives. Now, of course, he's serious about it. We would see more serious investigations. I guess the question on my mind is that why is it that the key ministries a lot of times are staffed by pro-Iran entities, specifically in the oil sector? So the ball is in his court, but ultimately I think he needs to know there's repercussions for really simply appeasing the United States and not meaningfully countering Iranian influence.
Please, if you have any comments related to Iraq.
Can I add? I just want to add, I mean, the issue of the militias, the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq is very interesting because it brings up this issue of demobilization as well. How do you demobilize? The PMFs, the Popular Mobilization Forces, which were formed to combat ISIS, technically report to the Prime Minister's office, but the hardened elements of it, عصائب أهل الحق, كتائب حزب الله, جيش المهدي and Badr in particular, you know, they have a direct line to the IRGC, and that's part of the problem. So the question, there's a big debate right now because Soudani, the Prime Minister, has introduced a bill in Parliament that proposes that they be integrated in the army, and it created a huge controversy because there are those who believe that this will legitimize them by allowing them to operate legally, and others who believe that the opposite will happen, you know? And so the US has stood steadfastly, as far as I know, against the integration of the militias into the army in that manner. So, but it does bring up the question is, how do you get rid of these people? How do you demobilize such a militia when the time is right?
Thank you. Johnny, you mentioned, we have about 10 minutes left, by the way, so I want to shift a little bit from the axis of resistance, let's say, to the Abraham Accords vision of the future. You mentioned, I believe, that, peace between Israel and Syria could happen faster than peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, I think you said. So give us a sense of where you think things stand in terms of relations between many of the Arab countries and Israel. You've been, I guess, a leader of the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, or maybe you're chairman now. I apologize, I forget your exact title, but you've really been involved in the situation in Gaza very directly, personally, which obviously has an impact on these relationships. So, what's your assessment of the Abraham Accords vision, especially with the Islamic Republic on its back foot?
A few just general observations. The first one is we have to be honest with ourselves. Everything is different. Okay? There are a lot of moderate Arab families in the Gulf that for the first time are dealing with a temptation towards extremism in their own families, right? Because the Islamic Republic and their proxies and increasingly Europeans, not coming from the Gulf, trying to project on Europe ideas like people with citizenship living in Europe, controlling media outlets of extraordinary influence, are participating in a information war on the Hamas side, on the Islamic Republic side of the information war. And so we have to be honest. This is not 2016, okay? And that's on our side of the conversation. On the Gulf and the Arab side of the conversation, there's a level of clear-eyedness that's required there too, which is they don't recognize their own region anymore. Okay, virtually every leader sitting in every seat in one of those countries has spent their entire life managing a region that was that had these proxies everywhere. And in the same way, we have to be honest about the different set of challenges now. They have to be honest themselves about the different set of challenges, but also opportunities. I also think that all these proxies are not the same. I mean, the Houthis are very different than Hezbollah, and it's also the case that the Islamic Republic, despite being at a level of historic weakness, unparalleled weakness, and more important than that, unparalleled shame, okay, which they really can't deal with at the leadership level, they're also working very aggressively for the next proxies. I mean, nobody's paying attention to what's happening in Sudan, for instance, literally right across from the Houthis, okay? And so I'm not sure that we have enough of a very, very honest perspective on what it will take to take these historic changes and make sure that they are for the good. Now, will there be regional peace and regional integration? I think the moment the war in Gaza is over, hopefully sooner rather than later, I do think we're going to see surprising changes all across the region. It just takes this. This is the thing holding it up. It may be closer today than it was yesterday. And one of the observations we've had in the work in Gaza also is whether the Gazans that GHF is dealing with were not radical to begin with or have been de-radicalized by the experience of this war. We're interacting with Gazans every single day that can be partners for peace in the region. And I think that is a product of a lesson that all the proxies learned of the Islamic Republic. It's a lesson the Iranian people knew already, which is these corrupt leaders sitting at the top of this regime in Tehran. They will sacrifice in the same way Hamas is willing to sacrifice every single Palestinian from Doha. The Islamic Republic regime sitting in Tehran, not only are they willing to sacrifice every proxy, okay, they didn't come to the defense of one of their proxies. And other than sharing intelligence with the Houthis, have not come to the defense of the Houthis either. In the same way the people of Iran understand that the first victims of the Islamic Republic are the Iranian people themselves. So this is not a moment for rosy optimism. Regional peace is doable, very doable. It will happen, I believe, before the end of this administration. But there are a different set of problems that I'm not sure that we're thinking hard enough yet about solving.
Any three of you have a reaction to that? Heather, I want to ask you about the U.S. role in defense and so on in the region. But so that's part of my question.
It's a question to him, but I totally agree with you. I want to ask you though, but talks are already ongoing on the Syria side, right?
I think I think talks are going on everywhere on everything. I mean, that's the most remarkable thing about all of this, is that whether some of it's public or some of it's private, whether it's new, it has never stopped, and that's the new Middle East. And this is why this is a reason to be optimistic.
In our last 5 minutes, Heather, and I want to ask Jonathan a question.
But it requires American leadership, right?
That's where I was going to go.
The Israelis and the Syrians are not talking to one another without the United States in the middle of it, for sure.
In the recent war between Israel and Iran, the U.S. played a significant role in assisting Israel, in the defense of Israel. There's a lot of questions raised about what U.S. defense posture should be going forward in the region. I wonder, Heather, if you have thoughts on that. You mentioned Al-Udeid, and it's not going anywhere. At the same time, the U.S. evacuated it. Basically, it played no role whatsoever when the Iranians struck in Doha. So I don't know if you have thoughts on how you think the administration and the Pentagon should be thinking about U.S. defense in the region and leadership, defense leadership.
The clock says we have 4 minutes, so I'm going to try to be.
An easy one.
I'm going to try to be as quick as possible here. So, segueing from what Johnny said, I do think the most important element in sort of unpacking the answer to your question, Aaron, is the U.S. leadership. Right now, the U.S. is leading in that we are facilitating conversations. We are creating the operational environment for Israel to act when we don't necessarily want to be the face of a strategic maneuver. But I think that it's really high time that we move the conversation away from simple technological coordination and really start working on articulating a vision for what a fully integrated, regional security architecture looks like, sort of at the practical or sort of like the layperson level. We can get there. There are legislative issues that have to be dealt with, such as the QME issue, and I'm looking at the clock, trying to go fast here. But I think, there's no doubt about the U.S. military presence in the region. Al-Udeid isn't going anywhere. The Fifth Fleet isn't going anywhere. There's no appetite from regional partners for any of that to disappear. If anything, they keep investing in building it up. So the preference for the U.S. security umbrella is quite clear. But we need to move, sort of diplomatically into I think, a visionary era about what does this really look like, and start facilitating conversations not just between the U.S. and regional partners at the highest level, but starting to work on changing the conversations that those regional leaders, it doesn't matter if it's in Damascus or in Abu Dhabi or in Doha, feel that they are empowered to have with their publics. Because even though everything's an autocracy, you don't need permission, you still have to be in conversation with your public and changing the conversation about understanding why regional security cooperation is valuable. And that's where U.S. leadership is needed.
Thank you. I want to give Jonathan the last word and bring it back to Iran and the state of the regime, which I think is obviously of great interest to people here at this conference. What does all of this mean to you in terms of, where things ought to go, in terms of supporting the Iranian people, weakening the regime? Those who fear, regime collapse will often conjure up scenarios about the collapse of the Iranian society and the country as a whole. What should the West be doing and groups outside of Iran to try to facilitate a positive change and one that mitigates, potentially risky consequences? You get the last words.
Sure. No, you're right to point out that there is a fear, I think, amongst the West, a lot of Western policymakers, that regime collapse would directly fuel societal collapse. So I think we've had numerous crises that Iranians have endured, and we've not seen a total societal collapse in any sense, really. So of course, currently there's a water scarcity crisis paired with power. Just broadly, really an environmental crisis. Again, we haven't seen societal collapse. During the 12-day war, we saw, I remember other panelists noting that, yes, we saw a very strong civil society, a very, very resilient civil society when it comes to times of crisis. And part of it is due to the sense of nationalism that was really reaffirmed during the modernization under Pahlavi, that we saw this really Iranian identity to be reestablished, I guess, for what it is. So I think when we're talking about a potential regime collapse or regime change, depending on how things go, we have to keep in mind the society that we're dealing with. We're talking about a resilient society that absorbs a lot of crises. That's also, of course, very, I would say, overeducated to an extent. And you're comparing it to the other regime change scenarios in the region, the society is very different, of course. The majority young. You're talking about a young population that has an eye towards the West, has the aspiration for, true democratic governance. So I think we have to take that all into account when we perhaps are fear-mongering as to what Iranian society would look like after regime change.
On that hopeful note, thank you, Patricia, Heather, Jonathan, Johnny. Appreciate it. Very good conversation. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
We now invite you to join us for lunch. We ask that you please remain in your seats as lunch will be served.
پس ما بریم لانچ بخوریم. مگه صحبت بسیار روز خوش آمدن که خواستید تشریف این بالا. جالب بود. حالا جناب جلوانی هستین شما؟
منم میرم لانچ.
باشه بریم لانچ. فکر کنم ببندیم در مغازه رو دیگه، یا به وایسیم اینجا یه موزیک بذارم همینطوری اگه هر کی خواست بیاد تا بعد از لانچ برگردیم. نمیدونم، حالا باید فکر کنم ببینم، شاید اتاق رو ببندم. بعد فکر کنم شاید موزیک گذاشتم. اکچولی فکر میکنم منم میرم بعد از لانچ برمیگردم. در صورت دوستان روزتون خوش. بدرود تا درودی دیگر.